Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere cold. Not cold like forgot your jacket cold, but the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, that makes your breath hang like ghosts in the air, the kind of cold that drives people to huddle close under thick wool blankets and even closer under animal furs. You're in a longhouse now, timber walls groaning in the wind, firelight dancing across dark beams stained with the soot of 100 winters. This is where Viking love stories start, not with moonlight serenades or awkward teen drama, but with survival, with warmth, with proximity. Before we go any further, reality check. You probably won't survive this. Not long term. You're entering a world where winters kill, childbirth is a gamble, and your place in society is only as safe as your alliances. Love and sex? They're not side stories, they're survival tools, cultural rituals, and sometimes power plays. And yeah, they're also fun, when you're not freezing or fighting off rival clans. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I want to know, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The night stretches over the Scandinavian landscape like a thick fur pelt, pulled tight across the land. Inside your chieftain father's longhouse, it's smoky, loud, and oddly intimate. You can hear goats bleating in the corner, a baby fussing 2 beds over, and the rhythmic snoring of a man who's had too much mead. Privacy? Not a thing. The idea of a separate bedroom? A hilarious fantasy. Here, in this one-room wooden structure shared by an entire extended family, things just happen. You grow up knowing the sounds of sex like you know the crackle of the hearth fire. It's part of life, not hidden or whispered about. From the moment you're old enough to carry a water bucket or stir the stew, you notice the glances. Who sits next to whom? Who leans in a little too close during storytelling? Who laughs a bit too loud at another's joke? And then there are the subtle gestures. Braids loosened, tunics lowered just a touch, a hand brushing past a hip. Flirting in the Viking world is quiet, charged, and often wordless. Words can get you in trouble, but bodies know. Here's your first historical truth of the night. Viking society wasn't nearly as prudish or male-dominated as modern stereotypes suggest. Women could own land, divorce their husbands, and even reclaim dowries. When it came to sex, women weren't seen as passive or secondary. You weren't a possession, you were a partner. That longhouse might be ruled by a jarl, but his wife. She holds the keys, literally. They jingle at her hip, symbolizing control over food stores, household wealth, and often the rhythm of desire in the home. You remember the first time you snuck a glance at a pair coupling near the far fire pit, your cousin and a visiting trader. No one interrupts them. No one really looks away either. There's an unspoken rule here. If you're not causing harm and you're being discreetish, you're fine. Your grandmother tells you one day with a wink, in the dark days, the best way to stay warm is to share skin. You don't ask questions. You file it away. Now here's a fringe detail most people miss. Those furs Viking women wore? Not just for style or warmth. Some were treated with herbs and oils that acted as mild aphrodisiacs when warmed by body heat. Smelling someone's cloak wasn't just a sniff. It was a social cue, a hint, a spark. As a child, you sleep curled between siblings and cousins, and when the night quiets down, you listen. To soft murmurs, to breaths quickening, to bodies shifting. It's not titillating, not yet. It's just normal. And it teaches you one thing early. Sex isn't shameful. It's necessary, like food, like warmth, and it's everywhere. Of course, that doesn't mean it's always romantic, or easy, or fair. There's debate among historians about how equal things really were. Yes, women could divorce and own land, but only if they were freeborn. Enslaved women, or thralls, had almost no rights. Their bodies were often commodities. Their consent didn't matter. So while you, as a jarl's daughter, might grow into your power with a cheeky smile and a silver necklace, another girl, same age, same beauty, but born to a thrall mother, might be used to settle a debt or passed between traders. It's one of those brutal divides that scholars still wrestle with. Were Viking women empowered? Yes, but not all of them. The freedom was real, but not universal. You grow up watching women take the lead. You see your aunt whisper to her husband, and him rising instantly to refill her cup. You see shield maidens flirt like warriors, teasing with a blade's edge and a crooked grin. You learn quickly that softness isn't weakness here. A woman can gut a fish, raise a child, hex a neighbour, and seduce a stranger, all in one morning. And the men? They aren't always in charge. In fact, Viking masculinity was oddly fragile. Call a man Arga, a term implying he acted womanly or submissive in bed, and it could start a blood feud. Sexual reputations mattered, but not in the way modern people expect. A strong woman wasn't threatening. She was desired, feared sometimes, but definitely respected. That night, after a feast heavy with honeyed ale and roast boar, you watch the longhouse shift into its midnight shape. Laughter softens. Furs are pulled tighter. People disappear under blankets together. You catch the eye of someone across the firelight, just for a second. It's the kind of glance that lingers, that says, not tonight, maybe next time, and you feel it. That this life, hard and smoky and freezing, still pulses with desire, with connection, with an intimacy more honest than anything you've seen in stories. There's no romantic music, no perfect lighting, just skin and breath and shared warmth in a brutal world. You may not survive forever here, but for now, in this longhouse of glowing embers and whispered laughs, you are alive. Morning comes slow in the north. You wake up to the sound of ash being stirred back into flame, someone coughing, a goat shuffling close enough to chew on your braid. The longhouse is heavy with sleep and the scent of yesterday's feast. You lie still for a moment, listening to the creak of wood and the hum of wind pressing against the walls. The person beside you shifts, your cousin, maybe, or your little brother, and you're reminded again that bodies here are part of the landscape. Space is shared, warmth is borrowed. Privacy? Still a fantasy. But the longer you live in this world, the more you notice. Viking women aren't just surviving, they're shaping the rhythm of everyday life. Around the fire, during morning chores, in the soft banter exchanged over fish guts and flax. And in the bedroom, or, well, bed space, they aren't passive passengers, they're steering. Here's where things get interesting. In Viking culture, a woman could say no, and not just in the polite maybe later way. If she was freeborn and didn't want a man, her refusal mattered. There were laws about it, actual legal protections. If a man forced himself on a woman, especially one of noble or landowning status, he could be fined or even exiled. You hear the story from your aunt one morning while you're helping salt fish. A man in a neighbouring village ignored a widow's refusal. He thought her grief made her vulnerable. It made her furious. She took him to the Thing, the local court, and had him fined so heavily he had to give up 2 cows and half his stored grain. He moved away before winter. Now, don't get too idealistic. This isn't a utopia. Those protections didn't apply equally. Enslaved women? Not protected. Women taken in raids? Definitely not. And there were loopholes, especially if the man was wealthy, or if the woman couldn't prove what had happened. But the cultural undercurrent still mattered. A free woman's consent had weight, and that was radical for the time. You're growing into yourself now, taller, sharper, more aware of how people look at you. You start to notice how Viking women move through social spaces, not with shy glances, but with calculated confidence. They know who they are, they know their power, and they're not afraid to use it. There's another law you hear whispered about, a fringe little gem tucked into an old code. If a man insults a woman's honour, says she's promiscuous, or implies she's unfaithful, without proof, she can challenge him in court, or even demand compensation. You grin the first time you hear that. Imagine dragging some smug warrior to the Thing for calling you easy, and walking away with his prized belt buckle as a fine. It's not just in law either, it's in daily life. Viking women held serious influence in their households. You watch your mother manage trade deals, dictate labour and distribute food. When the men leave on raids, it's the women who keep the farm running. When it's time to harvest, it's the women who organise the village into something resembling efficiency. And when disputes rise, over land, over livestock, over love, sometimes it's the older women who settle them. Not with swords, but with words. Your best friend confides in you one day that she's been sneaking out to meet a fisherman's son behind the smokehouse. You raise an eyebrow. He's cute, sure, but he's got no land and smells like herring. She laughs and says, "I'm not marrying him. I'm just curious." And that's the thing. Curiosity isn't shameful. Sex isn't this big taboo. For free women, especially, it's a part of life. Something to explore, not hide. And Viking men, they're not expected to conquer women so much as win them over. Sometimes literally, with gifts. A decent cloak, a string of glass beads, even a carved bone comb. Romance was transactional, but not necessarily cold. It had its own poetry. There's a scholarly debate that makes the rounds in your head sometimes, one you've overheard elders discussing. Did Viking women truly have sexual autonomy, or was it all just performative within a patriarchal structure? In other words, was the power real or just relative? The truth, you suspect, is somewhere in between. A woman with land, family and support had options. A woman without those things, not so much. And yet, in either case, women found ways to assert themselves, through cleverness, alliances, even through their reputations. Reputation, after all, was everything here. Be known as someone who keeps her word, you're trusted. Be known as someone who takes what she wants, you're respected. Be known as someone who can make a man cry out in front of a fire without saying a word, you're remembered. One cold evening you sit beside a skald, a travelling poet, who sings of Hervor, a woman warrior who raised her father's ghost to demand a magical sword. The song is part myth, part memory, and every word of it makes your skin prickle. He describes her as fearless, as cunning, as someone who knew what she wanted and took it, including, he hints, lovers. Another song that night tells the story of Fridis, Leif Erikson's sister, who went to Vinland and faced down enemies while pregnant, wielding a sword with bare breasts exposed. Some say that part was added later, a dramatic flourish, but you don't care. The imagery stays with you. Breasts and blades, blood and power, softness and strength, all tangled together. Before you sleep that night, curled under your own furs near the fire, you wonder what your song would sound like. Not the one about who you'll marry, but the one about who you are. Will you be remembered for how you laughed at insults, or how you loved without fear? Will they say you moved like smoke through the longhouse, or like thunder across the fields? Your grandmother says you're sharp-tongued like her sister, who once made a chieftain blush with just a smile. You take that as a compliment. So yes, Viking women weren't just wives, or mothers, or background characters in someone else's saga. They were equals, sometimes superiors. They knew how to fight with axes, with laws, with glances, with charm. And in the bed space, shared or private, they weren't waiting to be chosen. They were choosing, often with intent, sometimes with joy, and always with power. The first time you see it, you're half hidden behind the herb-drying rack, pretending to organise sprigs of thyme while very much eavesdropping. Your older cousin is crouched in front of the hearth, grinding something in a small stone bowl, carefully, reverently, like it matters. And it does, because she's whispering to it. Not prayers exactly, but something rhythmic, low and unmistakably personal. The smell drifting from the bowl is sharp and musky, a blend of dried root and something that tickles your nose in a way that feels strange. You ask her about it later, casually, while you both fetch water from the well. She smirks. Just a little love magic, she says. Don't act like you've never thought about it. And she's right. You've thought about it. Here's a not-so-fun historical fact for the night. The Vikings may have been warriors and traders, but they were also believers in the strange, the invisible, the in-between. Magic, cedar as it was called, wasn't fringe. It was woven into everyday life, into farming, into healing, and yes, into love, into sex, into making someone fall under your spell or stay loyal, or never quite forget the scent of your hair. You learn quickly that the women who practice this kind of magic are both revered and feared. They know how to cool the wind, some say, or bring bad luck to a rival's marriage bed. Your neighbour claims her third child was born with a fox's cunning because of a charm hidden under her mattress. You don't ask what kind of charm. You're afraid you already know. Sex magic wasn't just a concept, it was a toolkit. Viking women might crush certain roots believed to stir desire, or carve runes into wood to make a lover more attentive. Some would sleep with a charm under their tongue. Others might smear special ointments behind their ears or in more intimate places. One fringe method, a braid cut and hidden in a lover's cloak, knotted with intention. The idea was simple. Hold something of them, and they'd never quite let go of you. Of course, this wasn't all hearts and flowers. Some of this magic had teeth. You hear one winter about a woman who was exiled, forced to live alone near the cliffs, after another woman's husband fell deeply, stupidly in love with her, and abandoned his family. The wife claimed it was cedar. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. The line between charm and choice gets pretty blurry when the heart's involved. This is where things get uncomfortable. Even the most respected magic-practicing women, Voller or seeresses, walked a narrow line. Too helpful, and they were treasured. Too powerful, and they were dangerous. Viking men could practice runes and some forms of divination, but Seder? That was considered women's work, which meant a man using love spells might be mocked, even accused of being unmanly, soft, submissive. Which, in a culture obsessed with honour, could wreck a guy's entire social standing. You remember the tale of Odin, chief of the gods, who was said to have practiced cedar to gain knowledge and influence. Sounds cool, right? But even the myths whisper that he paid a price for it. His dignity, his image. Being all-powerful came with the risk of being called womanly. That says something. There's still debate today among scholars about just how widespread sex magic really was. Some argue that most of it was symbolic, rituals performed for peace of mind more than actual impact. Others say it was deeply entrenched, a real force that shaped relationships, marriages, even politics. What's certain is that someone believed it, enough to write it into sagas, enough to outlaw certain practices later, when Christianity rolled in and started lighting everything pagan on fire. But in your time, Seder is alive, and you're starting to wonder about using it. You're not in love, yet, but you're curious. You want to know if that one boy, yes, the one with the freckles and the shoulder scar from axe training, would dream of you if you slipped fennel seeds into his mead. Not to trap him, just to find out. One night, you ask your cousin, the one with the whispering bowl, to show you the basics. She takes you behind the smokehouse, where the smell of burning pine masks your nerves. She pulls out a pouch and spills its contents into her palm. Dried flowers, bones small enough to be from a mouse, a shard of something that gleams faintly in the dark. She explains how each thing matters, that it's not just about ingredients, but intent, focus, belief. You watch her carve a rune into the bark of a nearby tree, muttering something in Old Norse that your grandmother would probably frown at. She turns to you and says, "You only use this if you really want the outcome. There's no undo button. Love magic. It always takes something from you." You don't ask what. You don't want to know yet. The next morning you wake up with dried petals stuck to your arm and a vague sense that you're in slightly over your head. But no one notices. Not even Freckle Shoulder, who is too busy showing off his axe throw to the younger kids. You remind yourself, magic or not, people still have to want you. Spells might open a door, but you have to walk through it yourself. Still, you can't stop thinking about it. There's something oddly powerful in just knowing this side of things exists. That beneath the formal rituals and marriage talks and feast day dancing, there's a secret layer where women tip the scales just enough to make the world bend. Not always, not perfectly, but enough. And there's another little-known tidbit. Fringe, half-whispered. Some spells weren't to attract lovers, but to keep others away. Women who had no interest in being courted, who were maybe interested in other women, or in no one at all, could use certain herbs to dull attraction, to mark themselves as untouchable. Not literally, but symbolically. You wonder, as you think back on the village's weaver, the one who always wore a fox tooth on a red thread around her neck. Maybe she was sending a message. That night, while brushing your hair with fingers stiff from the cold, you decide not to use your cousin's pouch again. Not yet. Not until you're sure what it is you want, and who you want it from. Magic is tempting. But so is the idea of being chosen just for being you. You crawl under your furs, listening to the sounds of the longhouse settling. Someone whispers a prayer, someone else giggles sleepily. The wind howls outside, but in here there's warmth and mystery, and the quiet knowledge that desire in this world is never just instinct, it's also art, language, magic. It happens suddenly and not exactly how you imagined. You're fetching water from the river, ice-crusted at the edges and thick with the smell of early spring thaw, when your mother casually says, "You'll likely be married by the next harvest." You stop mid-step, the cold sloshing over your boots, and turn to her like she's spoken in tongues. Married? You? You haven't even decided if you want to kiss anyone yet, let alone spend your life weaving cloaks and sharing a bed with them. She sees your expression and just shrugs. You're nearly 16. It's not strange. And in this world, it isn't. Viking society doesn't wait for the flutter of hearts or the approval of your diary. Marriage isn't about romance. It's about survival, alliances, trade routes, and children who can swing an axe by age 10. But even then, things are more complicated than they look. Contrary to what you might assume, Viking women often had a surprising amount of say in when, and with whom, they had their first time. There are rules, sure, expectations. But within those, you're not as powerless as you feared. You sit with your grandmother that evening, combing out the tangles in her hair, and she tells you the story of her first time. It wasn't with my husband, she says, grinning like it's no big deal. It was with a boy from a rival clan. We met in secret for months. I liked the way he listened, and the way he never asked me to braid his hair. He just let me. You gape at her. But wasn't that dangerous? She shrugs again, the bones of her shoulders sharp under her shift. Of course. But so is childbirth. So is love. So is living. That's the real truth. Viking girls weren't kept under lock and key. They were taught to be practical, to guard their reputations, yes, but also to understand their own power. You've grown up hearing it over and over. What a woman does with her body shapes her future, but not always in the way outsiders might think. Virginity, not the sacred badge it would later become under Christianity. You could still be married after exploring. You just needed to be clever, discreet, or bold enough not to care. There's a field near the edge of the village where couples go to walk, usually after dusk. You've passed it before, seen figures pressed against trees, heard laughter in the grass. No one talks about it, but everyone knows. These aren't shameful trysts. They're part of growing up, practice even. The elders call it finding your way before you bind yourself. You call it terrifying and fascinating. Your friend Sigrid, always braver than you, says her first time was behind the boathouse with a thrall. You stare at her, eyes wide. Wasn't he careful? She cuts in. Yes, and kind. He left a flower under my blanket afterward. You don't know what shocks you more, the act or the flower. But Sigrid isn't ashamed, and no one seems to think she should be. Thralls were lower in status, sure, but not invisible, and sex with them? Complicated, not forbidden. But then comes the first actual proposal. You're sitting near the fire, weaving, when your father says a neighbouring family wants to talk about a match. You freeze, the wool slipping from your fingers. This is it, your first real crossroads. You ask him cautiously, "Do I have to say yes?" And he looks at you, truly looks, and says, "Only if the offer's good. And if you don't, we'll find another." That's what surprises you most, the choice. Not unlimited, but there. Your father wants a good alliance, yes, but he also wants you to live, to thrive, to not spend your life married to a man who smells like wet dogs and argues with sheep. There's a clause in many betrothal contracts, you learn, that says if either party is unwilling, the match won't hold. It's not ironclad, especially for women without land or name, but it's something, and the stories back it up. You remember the saga of Gudrun, who had 4 husbands and left 2 of them by choice, or at least that's what the skalds say. The details change with every telling, but the point remains. Women could say no, could walk away, could choose their first and second lovers. And so you start to think more intentionally. You pay attention to who makes you laugh, who respects your silence, who doesn't just see your hips or hands but listens when you talk about how the wind changes before a storm. You flirt cautiously, test the waters, accept a flower, offer a carved bead. One night you share a blanket with someone. You don't go all the way, but close enough to feel the edge of it, close enough to understand what it might mean to cross. You expect to feel shame afterward, but you don't. You feel curious, like a door has opened, and you can decide when to walk through. Not everything is perfect. You've heard stories of pressure, of coercion, even within families. A visiting cousin who cornered a girl during a feast, an older man who kept giving gifts to a young weaver until she felt trapped into accepting him. Power can be wielded cruelly. But you also see women pushing back, shaming men in public, going to the thing, whispering warnings that travel fast and sharp like winter wind. There's debate now, in modern times, about how much of this was really freedom and how much was just relative lack of control. Some historians argue that Viking women weren't so much liberated as less restricted than their medieval counterparts. Others say the Norse world offered a rare window of agency before monotheistic religion closed the blinds. But what you know, what you live, is more complex than any modern summary. Your first time, it's your choice, eventually. Not with a husband, not with a trader offering sheep, but with someone who feels like spring thaw, unexpected and a little messy, but welcome after so much waiting. There's a warmth in your chest, a rush in your veins, and afterward you sit beside the river and feel utterly changed, but also utterly yourself. The longhouse doesn't burn down. No one disowns you. In fact, your mother gives you a fresh comb and says nothing. But her smile says everything. So now you know, the first time in this world isn't always wrapped in shame or ceremony. Sometimes it's just two people, cold hands, a blanket of moss, and a choice. One that you own, completely. There's a fight outside the longhouse, not with swords, those are for raids and rival clans, but with words, gestures, and the kind of rage that comes from bruised pride. A man is shouting, red-faced, and a woman stands before him, arms crossed, looking about as unimpressed as someone can while still holding a wooden spoon. You don't know what started it, but you catch one phrase loud and clear. She said no, and there it is. The line you've been hearing about, the one people say exists, but rarely talk about what it looks like when someone tries to cross it. You watch the argument unfold from a safe distance, heart thumping, because it's not about a simple misunderstanding. It's about consent, and what happens when someone tries to override it. Viking society, for all its violence and blood-soaked epics, has certain invisible rules that hold everything together. Consent is one of them, especially when it comes from a free woman. If she says no, that's supposed to be the end of it. Doesn't matter if the man's a landowner, a shipbuilder, or the chieftain's second cousin. In theory, you have the right to decide, and if someone ignores that, the community might look the other way for some things, but not that. Not always. You ask your aunt later what would have happened if the man had gone further, had forced the woman instead of just yelling. Your aunt, who once threw a pot at a man for grabbing her braid without permission, doesn't blink. He'd be fined, or worse, shamed. Maybe even outlawed if it came to it. No one wants to live beside someone who can't be trusted. The laws back it up. In some Viking regions, if a man forced a free woman, he had to pay thingret, a compensation fine, or risk losing his standing in the community. If the woman died as a result, the punishment could be exile or death. You're shocked. You didn't expect that level of protection. Not in a time where most of the world treated women's bodies like communal property. But here, it's different. Not perfect, but different. And yet, as always, it's not black and white. Enslaved women, thralls, don't have that same protection. Their bodies belong to their owners, and no one pretends otherwise. You've seen the way some men look at them, not as people, but as conveniences. Some women treat them better than others, offer them scraps of respect, even friendship. But the power imbalance never goes away, and neither does the silence around it. You think about the weaver's daughter, small and quick with her hands, who walks with her head low. There are rumours her master visits her corner of the barn too often. No one says it outright, but you can feel the tension whenever her name is mentioned. Some women whisper about protecting her, others say nothing. It's a bitter reminder that consent is a luxury not all women get to claim. Still, for free women like you, consent isn't just about the bedroom. It's about courtship, negotiation, marriage, and everyday respect. You remember when your cousin was courted by 3 different men at once, each trying to outgift the others with fish, carved beads, and offers to mend her father's roof. She strung them along for weeks, enjoying the attention, before picking the one who let her speak first during feasts. She told you afterward, he was the only one who didn't just want me, he liked me. That stuck with you. There's a ritual you've seen, quiet but powerful, where a woman offers a man a drink during a feast. If he accepts it, he's agreeing to her interest. If he drinks it all, he's signalling something deeper. But if he sets it down, it's a polite no, and no one mocks her for trying. That small exchange carries weight. It's not flashy, but it's sacred in its own way. A mutual understanding wrapped in horn and mead. The men are taught to. Not all of them listen, but enough do. Young boys are told by their mothers and grandmothers that if a woman turns her back, that means stop. If she doesn't laugh at your joke, maybe you're not as charming as you think. And if you push when she's pulled away, the whole village will know. Reputation spreads faster than frostbite in winter. Of course, some men still test the edges. They pout, beg, threaten. They say things like, "You'll regret this," or "You don't know what you're missing." But those are the weak ones, the ones trying to wear down boundaries instead of earn trust. You watch the stronger ones, the patient ones. They listen. They wait. They understand that being chosen is worth more than forcing your way in. One night during a feast, you sit beside someone new. He doesn't speak at first, just passes you a bowl of berries and waits. You glance at him. He looks away. It's oddly respectful. You talk about the fire, the way your fingers ache from weaving. He asks if your braid hurts, and you realise he's paying attention, not just to your face, but to your discomfort. It's a small moment, but it feels like something. He doesn't touch you, doesn't crowd your space, and when you leave, he doesn't follow. The next morning, he brings you a carved charm shaped like a fox. No words, just that. You find yourself smiling like an idiot. It's slow, this thing between you, measured, but it reminds you that consent isn't just about refusal. It's also about invitation, about saying yes and meaning it, about looking at someone and letting them know, not because you're pressured, but because you want to, and that might be the most powerful part of all. There's still an open debate among historians. How much of this social structure was genuinely about respect, and how much was just practical politics? Were women honoured, or just managed carefully because of their value in trade and alliances? Scholars argue both sides, digging through sagas and law codes like they're puzzle pieces. But you don't need a scroll to tell you what your body already knows. When someone asks, waits and listens, it changes everything. So the next time someone offers you a drink, you'll look them in the eye before you decide. Not because you're unsure, but because your answer, whatever it is, matters. And everyone in this firelit world knows it. It's late, and the feast has just ended. The fire's burned low, the air is thick with sweat, smoke, and the tang of spilled mead, and the longhouse has settled into that soft, murmuring quiet. You're not sleeping. No one really is. Not right after a celebration. Instead, people shift under furs, whispering, giggling, or slipping outside into the cool night air in pairs. You stay where you are, eyes wide open, listening. And what you hear confirms what you've suspected for a while now. Sex before marriage? Totally a thing, and not even particularly scandalous. Let's kill the myth right here. Viking culture wasn't puritanical, not even close. If anything, it was almost aggressively practical when it came to sex and relationships. People needed to know if someone would make a good partner, not just on the farm or in the kitchen or at the thing, but in bed too. It's not like they had dating apps. This was their version of swiping right, only with more mead and less ghosting. The idea that your first sexual experience should happen on your wedding night, that's a Christian import, and a later one at that. In your world, waiting for marriage wasn't expected, and in many cases, wasn't even smart. You're supposed to know your own body, and your potential partners, before you're locked into a lifetime of shared space, shared chores, and shared blankets. After all, winters are long, very long. If you can't get along, or worse, if you're miserable under the furs together, your life turns cold in more ways than one. Your cousin told you once, while peeling turnips and laughing under her breath, that she'd tested 3 men before settling on her husband. The first one talked too much, she said. The second one didn't know what to do with his hands. The third one, he was quiet and careful. He listened. She didn't sound ashamed. She sounded proud, like someone who knew how to pick a good knife from a pile of dull ones. And it wasn't just the women. Young Viking men were expected to gain experience too, not just in battle or trade, but in pleasure. They had to learn how to satisfy a partner, how to understand the body, how to not be a complete disaster between the furs. Being good in bed wasn't just a bonus, it was part of what made you a desirable match. And people talked. Oh, did they talk? You remember sitting near the weaving bench while the older women gossiped. One said a man was so clumsy he nearly rolled off the sleeping platform. Another claimed her lover could make her forget the cold completely. It wasn't crude, it was communal, almost like trading recipes. But instead of stew, it was technique. Fringe fact here, there were even customs that let couples try things out before getting betrothed. In some regions, families arranged a trial cohabitation, a kind of test-run marriage. The couple would live together for a while, often during the farming season, to see how they worked as a team. And yes, that included sex. If things went badly, they could separate before the official marriage rites. No shame, just good sense. And yet, not everyone was thrilled with this freedom. You've heard the priests mutter, the ones starting to poke their noses around the edges of Norse lands, spreading new ideas about chastity and sin. They talk about purity like it's currency, like women lose value the more they explore. But no one here really listens to them, not yet. Their gods may frown, but your gods celebrate love, fertility, passion. Freya, goddess of sex and war, would absolutely roll her eyes at the idea of virginity being more important than mutual satisfaction. There's a particular night that stands out in your memory. The summer sun barely dips below the horizon, and the air is thick with pollen and possibility. You slip away from the longhouse with someone who's been looking at you like they've already imagined the shape of you under your tunic. The two of you don't say much. There's no poetry, no preamble, just the press of lips, the sharp intake of breath, the rush of nerves and heat. You're not in love. Not yet. Maybe never. But you want this. And they do too. It's awkward, a little clumsy, and there's laughter when your elbow ends up in a patch of moss. But it's also real, honest. You learn things about yourself, what you like, what you don't. You learn how to say no, even in the middle of a yes, and that more than anything makes you feel powerful. The next morning no one asks questions, no one shames you. You help gut fish and braid onions just like always. The person you were with gives you a respectful nod, nothing more. That was the agreement, and you realise something else. Not every encounter has to end in a vow or a disaster. Sometimes it's just a moment, warm and fleeting. Historians still argue over how common this all was. Some say sagas exaggerated the sexual freedom of women to make them seem wild or exotic. Others insist that Norse culture genuinely respected women's choices when it came to their bodies. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Cultural norms vary between regions, clans, even longhouses. But the patterns are there. The sagas are littered with strong, outspoken women who made choices, who took lovers, who set the tone. And so you walk through this world with a little more certainty each day. You know your options, you know your worth. You know that sex isn't this sacred or shameful thing. It's just one part of the story you're writing for yourself, and you get to decide how it goes. That night, under the rustle of grass and the watchful eyes of stars, you whisper your own name into the wind. Not for anyone else to hear, just to remind yourself that you belong to you, first and always. You're standing in the market pretending to examine a tray of fish when the whispers start. Two women huddle near a stall, voices low but sharp, and you catch just enough to know who they're talking about. A girl from a neighbouring village, young, unmarried, and definitely not a virgin anymore. One of the women clicks her tongue, the other laughs into her scarf. She won't fetch much of a bride price now, one says. You feel your stomach drop, not because you agree, but because the myth still lingers. Virginity. You'd think, from how modern stories frame ancient cultures, that a Viking woman's value depended entirely on whether or not she'd kept her virtue. But here's the truth. It wasn't like that. Not really. At least not in the way later religions would try to enforce. The idea that a woman's sexual history determined her worth was far more complicated in Norse society, more tied to context, family status, and practicality than any abstract concept of purity. Yes, a woman's reputation mattered, but it wasn't just about whether she'd had sex. It was about how, why, and with whom. If a girl was known for sneaking around, lying, causing drama, or humiliating her family, that raised eyebrows. But if she was independent, discreet, and clever in choosing her partners, people noticed that too, and often with a kind of quiet respect. Your grandmother tells you a story while shelling peas, her fingers moving faster than your thoughts. She talks about her sister, who was known to have lovers before marriage, even a child by one of them. She was a smart girl, your grandmother says. She picked a man who could give her strong sons. She told her husband the truth and he still married her. You stare at her. Wasn't that unusual? She shrugs. Unusual doesn't mean wrong. He needed land, she needed security, and they liked each other well enough. That's the heart of it. In many Viking households, practical needs outweighed romantic ideals. Virginity wasn't irrelevant, but it wasn't sacred either. Dowries were negotiated around family alliances, available land, shared livestock, not the supposed value of a woman's untouched body. In fact, you've seen plenty of young women get married after having lovers, especially if they came from good families or had useful skills. Weaving, healing, organising trade, you could be terrible in bed and still land a strong match if you knew how to manage a household. There's a kind of freedom in that logic. A brutal kind, sure, but still a kind of freedom. And let's be real. Bloodlines mattered, yes. Legitimacy of children mattered. But even that was flexible. If a man acknowledged a child as his, especially in private agreements, that often settled the issue. And if he didn't, well, you'd better have your sisters, aunts, and maybe a few loyal neighbours ready to speak on your behalf at the thing. One fringe fact you overhear from the Scalds is that in certain regions, women use small charms to simulate virginity on their wedding night. Not because it was necessary, but because it made the in-laws more comfortable. A few drops of animal blood on a cloth, a carefully timed performance. You can't decide if that's tragic or genius. Maybe both. Either way, it tells you everything you need to know. Virginity was more about perception than reality. Still, you can't ignore that some people cling to the myth. That young woman in the gossip circle, her family is struggling. They need a good match for her to secure land rights. And now that rumours are circling, the offers might dry up. Not because she slept with someone, but because she did it without securing a future first. That's the difference. That's what stings. Not the act, but the lack of strategy. You meet her later, alone, by the river. She doesn't cry, doesn't apologise. He said he loved me, she tells you. Her voice is hard, brittle. Then he married someone else. A better deal, I guess. You sit with her for a long time. Say nothing. Because there's nothing to fix, only something to remember. That this world might be freer than most, but it's still built on expectations. Still full of invisible lines that women walk every day. Your friend Sigrid has a different take. She announces one evening that she'll never marry at all. Just take lovers, help raise her sister's children, and live alone like the old goat woman in the woods. She has a hawk and 4 cats, Sigrid says dreamily. She's doing just fine. You laugh, but secretly admire her boldness. Not every woman wants the husband-babies farm combo, and while that choice isn't always supported, it's not unheard of either. There's still debate among historians about whether Norse women were truly autonomous, or simply less restricted than their European counterparts. Some point to the sagas, where women are fierce, funny, flirtatious, and terrifying. Others argue that those characters were literary inventions, idealised or exaggerated to serve a patriarchal audience. But when you look at the laws, the artefacts, the patterns in burial goods and inheritance rights, a clearer picture starts to form. Women weren't symbols, they were people, and people are messy, complicated, inconsistent, just like now. So what did purity mean to them, really? It meant honesty. It meant keeping promises. It meant loyalty when it mattered, not chastity for the sake of control. You've heard more praise heaped on women who ran farms alone for a decade while their husbands raided than on those who kept their legs closed. No one sings songs about staying untouched. They sing songs about surviving winters, giving birth in snowstorms, brewing mead that made grown men cry. Those were the stories worth telling. You hold that knowledge close as you walk through the market again, past the gossiping women. This time, you look them in the eye. Not with defiance exactly, but with understanding. Their whispers don't come from power. They come from fear, from a world that's changing, from rules they can't quite explain but still try to enforce. But you've already decided. Your worth isn't wrapped in linen or sealed in hymens. It's in your voice, your choices, your future. Let them talk. You're tending the goats when you hear the laughter. It's coming from the other side of the fence where your aunt and her friends are sitting under the shade of a half-collapsed cart, sipping something strong and bitter from clay cups. You can't make out every word, but the tone is unmistakable. Teasing, wicked, full of amusement. You hear one woman say, "He's lucky she even lets him in the bed after the way he snores," and then more laughter, sharp and sudden. Then your aunt says, "She's got others, everyone knows." And just like that, the conversation shifts from goat watching to something far more interesting. Others, as in, not just the husband. You finish your chores quickly, pretending not to be too obvious, and slip closer under the pretense of gathering kindling. What you hear confirms what you suspected. In Viking society, fidelity was less a strict rule and more a flexible understanding. The bonds of marriage were there, sure, ceremonial, legal, and in many ways sacred. But they didn't always mean monogamy. Especially not for the men, and sometimes not for the women either. Take your aunt, for instance. Married for 10 years, mother of 3, owner of the sharpest tongue in the village. Her husband is a kind man, strong, a decent carpenter. But he's been away for months now, off with a trading crew heading toward the British Isles. And yet your aunt has had that same glow lately. That same quiet satisfaction she used to have right after her wedding. Her eyes linger too long on the stable boy. The women joke about it, but no one seems scandalised. Just amused. Envious even. And that's the strange thing. You'd been taught to think of marriage as a sealed contract. Exclusive. Inviolable. But here, it's more like a strong rope. Tied at both ends, yes, but with enough slack to let people breathe. Fidelity wasn't always the measure of love. Practicality often took priority over jealousy. Viking men, especially those of high status, often had multiple lovers, sometimes openly. A wife and a concubine living under the same roof wasn't unheard of. In fact, some sagas describe this setup in casual, even humorous terms. Wives fighting with their husbands' mistresses over chores, children playing together with no clue whose mother was whose. It was messy, yes, but not always forbidden. You hear about one local chieftain who keeps a lover in every village his ships stop in. Makes for complicated holidays, someone jokes, and everyone laughs, because it's true. But when women did the same, that's where things got more complicated. A free woman having lovers before marriage? Acceptable, expected even. But after marriage, things depended on status, discretion, and, ironically, her husband's attitude. Some men didn't care, as long as the household was running smoothly and no one was publicly humiliated. Others, especially the insecure ones, took offence at the idea of sharing their wife's affections. Those were the ones who barked about honour, about ownership. And those were usually the ones whose wives took extra long to return from berry picking. There was no universal rule. Every household was its own kingdom, and every marriage its own fragile treaty. Your cousin tells you in a hushed voice that one of the older women in the village has a lover who visits only during the waxing moon. He's younger, she whispers, eyes wide, and she wears perfume when he comes. You don't even question it. You just wonder what kind of perfume she uses, and whether you could get your hands on some. Here's a historical fact to chew on. Concubinage was common in Norse culture. Men, especially powerful ones, could keep concubines as part of their household. These women were sometimes thralls, sometimes not, and often held a complicated place in the home. Not quite wives, not quite servants. Sometimes they were loved, sometimes used, but often they bore children who were accepted into the family line, especially if the man acknowledged them. It wasn't always fair, but it was a system. Everyone understood their roles, even if they didn't always like them. And then there's the flip side. The women who bent the rules. You've heard tales of a certain woman in the northern fjords who refused to marry at all. Instead, she made her own trade deals, kept her own household, and took lovers whenever she pleased. Some called her a witch, others a legend. She never apologised. Some say she died alone, others say she died in the arms of her last lover, whispering secrets to the very end. Fringe fact. There were sagas that hinted at open relationships, couples who stayed together for partnership, land and legacy, but had an unspoken agreement to find pleasure elsewhere when needed. These weren't fantasy tales. They were reflections of real possibilities, real dynamics in a world where survival often trumped propriety. Of course, jealousy still existed, rage, betrayal. The human heart hasn't changed that much, but Viking culture didn't wrap fidelity in moral judgment the way later societies would. It was about balance, reputation, respect. If you were going to step outside the marriage bed, you'd better be discreet or powerful enough that no one dared question you. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how common non-monogamy was among Viking women. Some argue it was rare, limited to powerful women with unusual freedom. Others believe it was quietly normalised, at least in some regions. Either way, it's clear that the black and white moral codes of later Europe didn't quite apply here. And so you find yourself thinking differently about marriage. Not as a trap or a vow of eternal exclusivity, but as a partnership that might include other kinds of love. Temporary ones, fleeting ones, ones that happen in the quiet hours between duty and desire. You imagine your future, a husband perhaps, children, but maybe also a hand that brushes yours too long at the spring market. A long conversation under the stars, a secret you keep folded like a note inside your sleeve. And maybe that's okay, because in this world, love isn't always tidy, but it's real, it's layered, it's alive, and you, like the women before you, are learning how to make room for all of it. There's a fire pit glowing in the courtyard tonight, a rare clear evening when the sky stretches open, velvet dark and studded with stars. You're sitting cross-legged beside your mother and two other women from the village, each of them bundled in cloaks, steam curling from their wooden cups. In front of you, 3 men talk with your father, and between the fire crackling and the low hum of voices, you realise what's happening. A matchmaking meeting. Not for someone else, for you. It's not surprising, not really. You've known this moment was coming. Your mother's been inspecting your tunics more carefully, your father's been unusually polite, and your grandmother's been hinting at suitable futures in that maddeningly vague way of hers. But still, watching them discuss you like you're a prized mare or a new field up for trade, it sends a strange chill through your spine, one that has nothing to do with the cold. And yet, you don't hate it. Because here's the part no one outside your world seems to understand. Viking matchmaking wasn't just about 2 people falling in love. It was about property lines, family alliances, shared labour. It was about building a life with someone who could haul buckets in winter and not leave your roof sagging when it snowed. And importantly, it was rarely done without the input of the woman involved. You glance at your mother, who catches your eye and gives the slightest nod. That means you're not being forced into anything tonight. This is just the first step, a discussion, a gathering of intentions. The man in question is sitting near the edge of the group, slightly taller than average, clean boots, a thick gold clasp at his shoulder. You've seen him before. He's not unpleasant, quiet, thoughtful. You remember he helped your brother out of a ditch once without saying a word. There are worse candidates. As the night goes on, you notice something subtle. Your mother slipping small signals to you through her posture, the way she touches her cup. You realise she's assessing not just him, but you. Watching how you respond, how you breathe, whether you're leaning in or away. Because in this culture, while marriages are arranged, they aren't typically forced. The girl who protests loudly and convincingly is often heard. It's written into some of the legal codes. If a woman is given in marriage against her will and objects publicly at the thing, the match can be overturned. Doesn't happen often, but it's there, and you hold on to that knowledge like a hidden blade. Your aunt once told you, marriage is a bargain. Make sure you're not the only one paying the price. She had 3 offers before she accepted her match, and even then, she kept her own inheritance separate just in case. Smart woman. You're escorted to the longhouse later, just you and him, to talk for a few minutes alone. The door is open behind you, nothing scandalous, but it's a moment to feel things out. He doesn't look at you right away. Instead, he fiddles with a leather cord in his hand. Then he says, "You're good with animals." You blink. "What?" He shrugs. "I saw you calm a horse that kicked everyone else." You weren't expecting that. It's oddly respectful, personal. Not about your womb or your weaving or the number of goats you might bring to the marriage. Just a simple observation. You nod. "I'm better with animals than with people." He smiles. "Same." And for the first time, the tension in your shoulders eases a little. Still, you have questions about where he'll live, what his plans are for the farm, whether he expects you to stop visiting your sisters, or singing in the fields, or making the strange sour bread only you like. He answers carefully without rushing, and you realise he's testing you too. That's something else you've come to learn. Matchmaking isn't just about compatibility, it's about negotiation, and you're expected to negotiate. Bring a dowry, yes, but also bring expectations. Want to keep your family land? Say so. Want to name your first child after your mother? Say it now. Want your sister to be allowed to stay with you in hard winters? Speak. The first time you heard about a bride refusing to marry because her intended wouldn't agree to let her keep a horse, you laughed. Then you realised she won. She kept the horse. They got married a year later. Fringe fact, some Viking couples included formal agreements in their wedding ceremonies where the wife's rights were clearly stated. Property ownership, divorce terms, inheritance expectations. Think of it like an Iron Age prenup. These were spoken aloud in front of witnesses. If either party broke the agreement, they risked public shame, or worse, a legal claim against them. And when the match worked, it worked. You've seen couples who move together like 2 parts of the same engine. Not romantic necessarily, but efficient, loyal, affectionate in a way that isn't sweet but solid. Like the time your neighbour's husband stood up in the middle of a feast and said, "She saved our cattle during the flood. I'd be dead without her," and then sat back down like he hadn't just written a love poem with mud and frost. Of course, not all matches work, and divorce, entirely possible, sometimes initiated by the wife. If she had grounds, abuse, infidelity, laziness, she could walk away, often taking her dowry and children with her. It wasn't easy, it wasn't instant, but it was legal, and respected, especially if she proved her case. There's still debate among scholars about how much choice women really had. Some argue it varied greatly by region and status. Others say that even poor women could reject a match, at least once. Either way, the records show that women's voices weren't absent from these conversations, not if they knew how to use them. You leave the conversation with your would-be match feeling. Cautious, not excited, not afraid, just aware. You'll take time. Ask your mother what she really thinks. Listen to your sister's blunt, brutal opinions. Visit his farm. Ask about the other women in his family. Taste his cooking maybe, or make him taste yours. You're not in a rush. Because this isn't about fairy tales, it's about partnership. About choosing someone who'll respect you enough to ask before touching your loom, your land, or your body. And if you don't find that, you'll say no, loudly, proudly, and let them deal with it. You've shared the same sleeping space your entire life, not just with your siblings, but your cousins, your aunt when she visited, sometimes a neighbour's child if their longhouse roof was leaking, or they ran out of firewood. At this point, you're used to waking up with someone's cold feet pressed into your side, or a snoring relative breathing right into your hair. But now, as you get older, there's a different kind of awareness that creeps in with the night. A heightened sensitivity to sounds, to shifting blankets, to the occasional muffled giggle or rhythmic creak. Because in a Viking longhouse, there is no such thing as privacy. And yes, that includes when things get intimate. The logistics of Viking sex are nothing like what the movies show. There are no candlelit private rooms or plush beds tucked behind curtains. There's one giant open space, a fire pit in the centre, livestock snoozing in the back, and every family member, grandparents to toddlers, sleeping, living, eating, and yes, coupling all in the same room. If you're lucky, you might have a thin partition made of woven reeds, or a hanging tapestry for a bit of visual cover. But sound, smell, movement, good luck with that. And yet, people made it work. There's an unspoken etiquette here, an inherited code of nighttime decency. You learn how to turn over and pretend to sleep. You learn how to cough or shuffle loudly when things start to happen too close for comfort. You learn to offer your cousin a pointed glance at breakfast if she's been less than subtle with her latest fling, and she'll just raise an eyebrow and shrug as if to say, "What else were we supposed to do?" Sex isn't hidden in shame, but it's not flaunted either. There's a kind of communal modesty that makes it possible for people to live like this without constant embarrassment. Still, there are nights when you lie awake, blanket pulled over your ears, silently willing your brother's friend to stop flirting so loudly from across the fire. You ask your mother once how she and your father managed when they were younger, before the family had a separate side alcove for the elders. She snorts. "We learned to be quiet, or fast, or both." Then she adds, "Sometimes you don't need long, you just need the right moment." Right moment. That's a key phrase in a society where you're never really alone. It turns ordinary tasks, fetching water, checking traps, gathering herbs, into opportunities for stolen time. You've seen it. The brief disappearance of two figures into the trees, the slightly too long pause behind the shed. Privacy becomes an art form, a series of glances and split-second decisions, a language spoken without words. One of your favourite local tales involves a couple who built a hidden compartment under their sleeping bench, just big enough to roll into for a few stolen minutes. Risked splinters for love, your uncle likes to joke. But hey, it worked. They had 5 children and a reputation for never being caught, which in this village is basically a badge of honour. But even with all the improvising, there's something almost endearing about the way Viking intimacy exists alongside the chaos of daily life. You've seen couples giggle like teenagers when a toddler climbs into their bed mid-embrace. You've watched someone lean over mid-foreplay to stoke the fire or swat a goat trying to eat the laundry. Passion and practicality live side by side. Always. Fringe fact, in some larger or wealthier households, there were designated sleeping spaces, even tiny separate rooms. Not for everyone, but for the elite, the chieftains, the traders with coin to spare. Those with a little more architectural ambition sometimes created lofts, platforms under the roof beams where lovers could climb up and disappear for a while. You imagine the creaking wood, the thrill of being just out of sight but still within earshot. Romantic, kind of, drafty. Absolutely. Even the design of the beds themselves mattered. Most weren't what you'd call comfortable. Straw-stuffed mattresses, animal furs and wooden frames that groan with every movement. It's not exactly a mood setter. But again, this is where that famous Viking adaptability comes in. You learn to move carefully, slowly, or with enough passion that you don't care how much noise the headboard makes. There's a scholarly debate, still ongoing, about how much of Viking sexual life was affected by these communal living conditions. Some argue that it created a sense of collective normalization around sex, that children grew up seeing it as a natural part of life, not something mysterious or shameful. Others suggest that it led to repression, to secret longings that only emerged in sagas and poetry. But you, lying there at night with the sound of someone whispering just 3 feet away, know the truth is somewhere in between. You're aware of everything, the tension, the softness, the awkwardness, the risk. There's no illusion of privacy. Every glance, every sigh, every shared smile in the dark, it's noticed. Not judged, necessarily. Just seen. And that shapes your experience too. You learn to be more intentional with your body, with who you let close, and when. You know that if you invite someone under your furs, there's a chance your little sister might roll over in her sleep and drape her arm across your leg. There's a chance your grandmother might be snoring 2 feet away. There's a chance the dog might decide to insert itself into the foot space at the worst possible time. But despite, or maybe because of, that when you do choose to be with someone, it feels intense, present. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. You're both aware of how precious the moment is, how temporary, how in a world that never truly closes its eyes, you manage to create a sliver of something just for the two of you. Later that night, wrapped in your furs, you hear another couple shifting across the room. A quiet laugh, a breath caught in the throat, then silence. You smile, roll over, and let the longhouse rock you to sleep with the familiar symphony of firecrackles, distant whispers, and the soft heartbeat of a community that breathes together, even in the most intimate moments. It starts with a pot thrown at a wall, loud, ceramic, shattering. And then silence, except for the low, bitter sound of a man cursing under his breath. You're outside, plucking herbs, but that kind of domestic drama carries. Inside the longhouse, your neighbour is having what can only be described as a marital meltdown. Again. This is the 3rd time this month someone stormed out of that household and ended up drinking alone by the fishing nets. You don't need details, you already know what it's about. Because when things break in a Viking marriage, they usually break in very familiar ways. Boredom, betrayal, bad sex, or bad livestock management. Sometimes all 4 at once. But here's the twist that never fails to surprise outsiders. Viking women didn't have to stay stuck in those situations. They could leave, not sneak out in the dead of night or fake their own death or hope for divine intervention. No, they could walk away, publicly, legally, and with most of their dignity and property intact. You learn about this firsthand when your cousin Svala decides she's done with her husband. It's not a scandal. It's not even shocking. She just tells you calmly while you're washing wool. He doesn't listen. He doesn't touch me. He smells like turnips. I'm done. That's it. No sobbing, no dramatic saga-worthy curses, just tired clarity. And you believe her, because you've seen how she used to light up around him, once upon a time, and how lately she's gone quiet at feasts and walks ahead of him, like she's trying to outrun his presence. You nod. So what will you do? She shrugs. Take back my dowry, move in with my brother for now. The goats are mine anyway. This isn't some isolated case either. In Norse law, a woman could divorce her husband for a range of reasons. Neglect, abuse, cheating, impotence, laziness. And she didn't need his permission. She just had to announce it in front of witnesses, usually at the threshold of the home, stating her intent clearly. Some versions required 3 separate announcements spaced over time, others just one, but the message was the same. I'm out, and once divorced, she could remarry. Or not. She could keep her dowry, reclaim her personal belongings, and if there were children, often keep them too. especially if the husband had no means to care for them properly. This wasn't a system designed to punish women for wanting more. It was designed to keep households functional and communities from turning into longhouses full of resentful people throwing pots. You think about what that would feel like, to stand at your own threshold, speak your decision aloud and have it stick. No begging, no court battles, just your voice, your witnesses, and the law. Now don't get too idealistic. Divorce wasn't always easy, and not every woman had the power or status to make it happen smoothly. A wealthy woman, especially one with land or brothers who could back her up, had options. But a poorer woman, or one who married into a more powerful family, might have to fight harder. Still, the possibility was there, and that alone changed everything. Even the gods made space for it. The sagas are full of love lost, of marriages abandoned and new ones formed. Divorce wasn't taboo. It was just another part of life's rhythm. You remember a story told by a skald at the last feast. A woman who left her husband because he mocked her in public, said she was as exciting as wet bark. She left him, took her goats, and later married a poet who wrote her a verse so filthy the children weren't allowed to hear it. Everyone at the feast laughed until mead came out of their noses. Even your father, especially your mother. Fringe fact. One Viking divorce ritual involved symbolic separation, each person walking away from the house through a different door, splitting up their shared possessions evenly before parting. It wasn't required, but it happened often enough to become part of oral tradition. You imagine it now, both parties walking into new lives, belongings in hand, maybe a little bitter, maybe a little relieved. Of course, not all marriages ended in disaster. Some grew stronger with time. You've seen couples weather raids, crop failures, even the loss of children, and still find comfort in each other's presence. But when it didn't work, it wasn't a life sentence. There's still a scholarly debate about how common divorce was in Viking society. Some argue that it was reserved for the elite, those with the resources to survive independently. Others believe it was far more normalised, especially in rural communities where cooperation mattered more than reputation. What's clear, though, is that the legal framework existed, and that's more than most cultures of the time can say. You visit Svala a week after her threshold announcement. She's already moved in with her brother, sleeping in the loft with his daughters and helping with the cooking. She looks lighter. She makes a joke about the turnip-smelling ex and offers you a bowl of stew that's surprisingly spicy. You ask her what she'll do next. She smiles. Whatever I want, I have time, and my goats. And so you start to look at the couples around you differently. Not with cynicism, but with curiosity. Who truly wants to be there? Who stays because it's easier? Who's dreaming of the day they can say, "This isn't working," and walk into something better? That night, under the low roof of your own home, you watch your mother rest her hand on your father's back as he sharpens a blade. A small gesture, intimate, effortless. She chose him, and would again. You can see it. And if that ever changed, she'd be the first to say so. So when you think of love in this world, this wild, frost-bitten, goat-filled world, you don't think of it as a binding contract. You think of it as a long winter's journey, best travelled with someone who knows when to share the blanket and when to let you breathe. And if they don't, well, that's what the threshold is for. You feel the ship before you see it. How the ground hums faintly beneath your boots. How the villagers stop what they're doing mid-task, heads tilted toward the sea. Then the horn sounds, low and unmistakable, and the whole village shifts like it's been holding its breath for months. They're back. The raiders, the traders, the sons and brothers and husbands and lovers, home from wherever the longboats took them this season. You drop the pail in your hand and run. Not because someone's waiting for you on that deck, but because the air suddenly crackles with everything. Tension, excitement, and the complicated sort of joy that only comes when someone returns from danger alive. The boats glide in like wolves on the water, sleek and scarred. You see them now, men sun-browned and sea-beaten, grinning through cracked lips, hauling bags heavy with silver, spices, stolen cloth, and stories. So many stories. But as the men climb off, one by one, there's something else that steps onto the shore too. Invisible but just as real. The shift in energy. The quiet reality that these men didn't just bring back loot. They brought back entanglements. Because let's be honest, no one really expects monogamy during a sea raid that lasts half a year. You know what happens on those foreign shores. The women left behind pretend not to think about it too hard, but they know. Some raiders return with jewellery for their wives. Others return with women. It's not always what you'd expect. Sometimes, the women brought back are captives. Yes, taken by force, traded like objects. But sometimes, they're not. Sometimes they're women who chose to follow their Viking lovers back across the sea, leaving behind their families, their old lives, their language, in exchange for something new. Something dangerous, but not without agency. You've seen it. Women with dark hair and strange accents who now weave by the river or help tend goats, eyes constantly watching for judgment. And judgment does come, not always loudly. Sometimes it's a sideways glance, a muttered word, a deliberate exclusion. But other times, nothing. Because Viking society, for all its brutality, does make room for the complicated, especially if the new woman pulls her weight and keeps her head high. There's one in particular this season. She arrives wrapped in a heavy blue shawl, hair braided differently than anyone else's, speaking only a few clipped words of your language. No one knows if she came willingly or not. The man she's with claims she chose him, that they met during a peaceful trade and that she wanted a new life. Some believe him. Others don't. You watch her closely for days, trying to guess the truth by how she walks, how she reacts to sudden noises, how she touches his arm in public. There's no clear answer. What you do know is this: she isn't the first, and she won't be the last. Your people move between violence and tenderness with startling ease, and sex is often the rope that connects the two. There's an old story about a raider who fell in love with a noblewoman he was supposed to ransom. Instead, he gave away his silver to buy her freedom from her own family and brought her back with him. She bore him 3 children and became known as a fierce midwife, trusted even by women who never learned her name. No one knows if the story is true, but it feels true. Fringe fact. Some Viking men did marry foreign women, either captives or willing lovers, and those women, if they bore sons, could elevate their social status dramatically. A child of a foreign-born woman might still inherit, especially if his father was powerful or if the mother brought useful connections, which meant in some rare cases a former captive could rise to become a respected wife, even the matriarch of a clan. But that doesn't erase the shadow of coercion. Not all these stories are romantic. Not all these women have choices, and even when they do, the power dynamics are messy. Your aunt says, with one of her brutal truths, "It's not love if you can't leave." And you remember that when you see the blue-shawled woman sitting alone on a rock, watching the tide come in like it's the only thing that still makes sense to her. What makes it even more complicated is how some wives react. You've seen women who greet their husbands at the docks with open arms, and then quietly move their personal belongings to the other side of the sleeping platform that same night. Others pretend not to notice the extra pair of shoes by the door. A few rage loudly and spectacularly, throwing belongings into the mud and forcing the man to sleep in the barn for a week. But there are also women who already have lovers of their own, who've used their husband's absence to form bonds, however temporary, that fill the space he left behind. And when he returns? Well, sometimes they reach an understanding, sometimes they don't. But the underlying truth remains. Absence opens doors. There's a debate that still surfaces in modern scholarship about these relationships forged during raids. Were they mostly transactional, based on power, survival, or something else? The sagas give conflicting images. Some paint them as true romances, others as grim necessities. The line between seduction and force blurs, and for every happy ending, there's a story of someone who never adjusted, who died unnamed and alone in a land not her own. Still, you know one woman who came across the sea and thrived. She learned the language faster than anyone expected. She started crafting bone combs and selling them at market. She taught the local children songs from her homeland. Eventually people stopped calling her the foreigner. They just called her Edda. But even Edda has days when she goes silent, staring out at the sea like it's waiting to take her back. You think about what that would be like. Your man gone for half a year, no word, no certainty he'll return, and then when he does, he steps off the boat with another woman in tow. Not just a betrayal, but an upheaval. And yet, it happens. It's almost expected. One of the older women told you dryly, if he brings back treasure, you thank him. If he brings back a woman, you remind him that she'll need to do her share of the work. It's a harsh truth. A Viking truth. Because here, love and sex exist in a world built on survival, where feelings take a backseat to food, shelter, and not freezing to death. You learn to adapt, to choose your battles, to share space, sometimes even your partner, and some women, like your cousin, choose not to wait at all. Her husband left 3 years ago on a raid, never came back. She mourned for a while, then took a lover, then a second. Now she runs her own farm, wears 2 rings on one hand, one from her wedding, one from herself. This one, she says, tapping the second ring, means I belong to me. You think of her as you watch the new arrivals settle in. Boats unloaded, strangers claimed, boundaries redrawn. This isn't the end of anything, just the beginning of the next cycle, of reshaped households, reassigned sleeping spaces, and hard questions no one dares ask out loud. But you're paying attention, and you know what it means to live in a world where love, like the sea, is always shifting, always unpredictable, and never entirely in your control. The first time you see her, she's chained. Not with heavy manacles or dramatic iron loops, but with something far more subtle. A delicate bronze collar at her throat, attached by a lead to a leather belt held by a broad-shouldered man in furs. The 2 of them are just arriving, mud-slicked from travel, faces unreadable, and everyone in the longhouse pretends not to stare too long. But you watch. Of course you watch. Because she doesn't look frightened, or even defeated. She looks bored. She's a captive, that much is clear. Maybe taken in a raid, maybe bought in a port market far from here. You've seen a few over the years. Thralls brought back to work the fields, the hearths, the homes. But this one is different. She walks with her back straight. She meets your eyes without blinking. And when her captor laughs too loudly at something crude, she rolls her eyes in a way that makes your skin prickle. Not in fear, in recognition. You don't speak her language, not yet, but you understand what's happening. She's been claimed. Maybe for labour, maybe for trade, maybe for something else entirely, and you know what that means. In this world, captured women often become more than housekeepers. They become lovers, consorts, tools of alliance and release, and sometimes they become something neither expected. There are stories, whispered during chores or over stew, about women who were taken as thralls and ended up in their captors' beds. Some by force, some by quiet negotiation, some who used those nights to slowly, carefully turn the tables, to learn the language, understand the household, win over the other women, and eventually rise from slave to something resembling a wife. Never officially, of course, not always legally, but in practice. Status is a slippery thing. You've heard both kinds of tales. The tragic ones, women who tried to run and were dragged back bleeding, and the ones no one dares say aloud during feasts, of thralls who held real influence, whose children inherited land, whose descendants now sit beside you at market like their mothers never wore collars. The woman you saw earlier is now sweeping the hall. Her movements are deliberate, almost theatrical. You wonder if it's a performance. She looks at everything, never missing a detail. You suspect she already knows the layout of the longhouse, which children are quiet, which warriors have wandering hands. It's dangerous to underestimate someone like that. Your aunt warns you, later that night. Captive women make things complicated. For the men, yes, but especially for the wives. You nod. You've seen it. A man brings back a foreign girl, younger, quieter, or maybe just more interested, and suddenly his wife, worn from seasons of childbearing and goat chasing, has to compete in her own home, or doesn't. Some women fight, others ignore it. A few form unlikely friendships with these women, allies in a strange shared space where power leaks through cracks in the walls. And then there are the rarer stories of all, the ones where love somehow grows in the middle of it. There's a saga about a woman named Aslaug, taken as a thrall and given to a jarl as a spoil of war. He expected obedience. What he got was cleverness. She advised him on trade, helped manage his household. Eventually he set her free and married her. Some say it's just a story, but then again, you know how stories begin, with someone like the woman now serving mead with her chin lifted a little too high. But let's not romanticize what's built on chains. Most of these pairings are not love stories. They're about imbalance, about power, about access denied and taken anyway. You know this. You've seen the signs, women who flinch, who retreat, who move like they're always bracing for something. And no one speaks openly of it. The longhouse has its rules, but they're murky when it comes to captives. It's as if people want to believe that once a woman survives the voyage, She becomes part of the household by osmosis. That consent is assumed once her collar is loosened. But you know better. You've learned to watch for the silences. One night, that same woman slips out of the longhouse and stands by the stream staring at the water. You follow, not out of nosiness, well, maybe a little, but because something in her stillness calls to you. You sit a few paces away and hand her a piece of bread. She hesitates, then takes it. You both eat in silence. Then she speaks. Just one word. Free. You don't know what she means. That she is. That she was. That she wants to be. But the sound of it cracks open something inside you. Because here, in this world, freedom isn't absolute. Not even for the wives. But for someone in her position, it's everything. The distance between servitude and partnership is vast. And still, some women manage to cross it. Fringe fact? There's archaeological evidence, graves with mixed cultural artifacts, that suggest some enslaved women did integrate fully, even ritually, into Viking communities. Not just as labourers, but as mothers, healers, respected members. It doesn't erase the brutality of their arrival, but it complicates the narrative. There's an open debate among historians about how to interpret these relationships. Were they acts of survival mistaken for romance? Were some genuinely consensual over time? Was affection even possible under those conditions? No one agrees, and maybe that's the point. History doesn't hand out clear answers, it hands out shadows. Back in the longhouse, the woman no longer wears her collar. It's gone, just like that. Replaced with a thin silver chain. Nothing fancy, but chosen, maybe. Or gifted. She speaks more now, helps with brewing, sometimes sings low songs in her own language while she works. People still watch her. You still watch her. But now, it's different. You ask your aunt what happened? She shrugs. He freed her. Maybe for love. Maybe just for peace. Either way, she's still here. That means something. You think about that as you lie awake later, furs wrapped around you, listening to the usual mix of snores and soft murmurs. Not all love here is clean. Not all sex is consensual. But inside the tangle of control and survival, there are moments, rare and hard-won, where something else blooms. Not purity, not rescue, just a quiet kind of resilience. And in this longhouse, that might be the most powerful thing of all. You're crouched near the hearth, helping your older sister grind herbs when the smell hits you. Sharp, earthy, and a little bitter. You wrinkle your nose. What's that one for, you ask, expecting the usual answer. Colds, bruises, childbirth pain. But instead she glances over her shoulder to make sure no one's listening and says very quietly, "To keep a belly from growing." You blink. She says it so casually like it's nothing more than a nettle tea or a poultice for a sore knee. But your chest tightens. You've always known, in the background hum of things, that not every pregnancy in the village is celebrated. That sometimes, after a long night behind the hay shed or a reckless moment with the wrong person, women seek out remedies to change the course of what's already begun. And in Viking culture, that knowledge isn't hidden in shame, it's simply not advertised. There's no official term for birth control in your language, but the concept, it exists, passed down from grandmother to granddaughter, woman to woman, often through coded language and shared chores. Certain herbs, like tansy or mugwort, are known to disrupt a pregnancy if taken at the right time. Others are used more preventatively, believed to cool the womb or quiet the blood. None of it is exact. All of it carries risk. But in a world where motherhood is both sacred and dangerous, control over your own body is more than a luxury. It's a form of survival. Your mother doesn't talk about these things directly, but she has a pouch in her trunk that no one touches but her. Once, when you were 10, you saw her open it and lift out a small cloth bundle. Herbs dried and knotted together with red thread. She noticed you looking and closed the lid before you could ask. But now, years later, you understand. That bundle wasn't for cooking, it was for choice. Because as much as fertility is celebrated in your world, statues of Freyr and Freya standing tall at spring rituals, fertility runes carved into doorways, babies wrapped in fur and blessed at birth, not every woman wants to be a mother. Or, at least not yet. Not with the man who couldn't even be bothered to bring her firewood the morning after. Not when she's barely recovered from the last birth that left her bleeding for 3 weeks straight. And not when she's 13, still figuring out her own body, let alone someone else's. One woman in your village, tough as a pine knot, always swearing, always laughing, once told you, "I've had 3 children, buried 2, I'm done." She keeps a vial around her neck, tucked under her tunic. No one asks what's in it, but every woman nods when they see it glinting in the firelight. There's a darker side, of course. Some herbs are dangerous. Too much tansy can poison a liver. Pennyroyal can stop a heart. The midwives know how to measure, how to whisper warnings, how to brew the right strength based on a woman's age, her cycle, her desperation. You sit with one of them one summer, helping her prepare bundles for the coming winter, and she says without emotion, "I'd rather help her now than dig her grave later." And yet, the line between health and taboo is thin. Some men don't approve. A few chieftains have tried to ban the use of womb teas, claiming it weakens the clan to limit births. But they don't carry the children. They don't die in the childbed. They don't wake up to tiny cold bodies in the middle of winter. So the women keep brewing, keep whispering, keep handing down the recipes in the coded language of women's talk. Not that all pregnancies are unwanted. Many are greeted with joy, prayers offered, names planned, celebrations arranged. But even then, birth is a gamble. There's no telling if it will end with a healthy baby, a living mother, or neither. You've seen it go both ways. One minute a woman is glowing with life, belly round, eyes shining. The next, there's wailing from behind the longhouse curtain, and a stillness so heavy it presses against your chest. Your sister had a difficult labour last spring. The baby was breech, and the midwife had to reach in and turn it with her bare hands, sweat pouring down her face, your sister biting on a leather strap until her gums bled. The baby lived. Your sister almost didn't. And when she finally woke up, she whispered to you, hoarse and shaking, "Not again. Not for a long time." You said nothing. But that afternoon, you brewed her a cup of something dark and bitter, herbs crushed the way the midwife had shown you. She drank it with a grimace, and then she slept. Fringe fact: some Viking women wore charms believed to protect against unwanted pregnancy, not just fertility for, but also against. Runes carved into bone, amulets made of animal teeth or stones. Most people think of runes as tools for battle or weather spells, but among women they had other meanings too. Subtle protections, personal intentions, quiet magic for invisible battles. Historians still argue over how much access Viking women really had to reproductive control. The written records are scarce, mostly because men weren't writing about women's herbal medicine unless it intersected with war or commerce. But the archaeological findings, herb traces in burial bundles, ritual objects associated with healing and women's spaces, suggest a deep, sophisticated knowledge passed between generations, just out of the reach of official history. You feel it every time you crush mint leaves in your fingers, every time you see your mother exchange a certain look with the midwife when someone's monthly blood hasn't come. It's an entire world, invisible to men, powerful in its quiet way. Because control over the body means control over fate. It means not being forced to tie yourself to someone forever because of one night. It means deciding when and if you want to face the pain, the joy, the risk of bringing life into this already difficult world. So you learn, you listen, you ask questions when no one else is around. You keep your own bundle of herbs tucked in a pouch beneath your sleeping furs, just in case. Because in a world where fire and frost rule everything, the most radical power you can have is the ability to choose. There's a bonfire roaring so high it seems to challenge the stars, and your skin prickles from the heat as much as the drums. This is no ordinary gathering. It's a feast day, the kind that stirs something ancient in your bones. The kind where people start drinking before noon, and by nightfall, the air is thick with smoke, sweat, and a tension that vibrates right under your skin. The skald takes the stage, if you can call it a stage, just a raised patch of stone near the fire, and begins to recite. Not laws or news, but sagas. Old ones. The kind where gods sleep with giants, sisters kiss like lovers, and a woman can curse a man to death with a well-placed insult and a clever rhyme. And suddenly you realise this isn't just storytelling. This is mythology tangled with memory, and it's dripping with sex. The old stories never shy away from desire. In fact, they lean into it with bare, calloused hands. You hear tales of Freya, the goddess of fertility and war, who takes lovers across realms and demands tribute in pleasure as well as gold. She's beautiful, yes, but also fearsome, capable of rage and tenderness, and unapologetically sexual, not punished for it. worshipped for it. And then there's Loki, slippery, sharp-tongued and wildly, gleefully chaotic, a shapeshifter, a seducer, sometimes a man, sometimes not. The Skald tells the one where Loki becomes a mare to distract a giant's horse, ends up pregnant, and gives birth to an 8-legged steed. Everyone howls with laughter, but underneath that laughter is something deeper. An understanding that sex, in the old myths, isn't boxed in. It's not always sacred or shameful, it's just everywhere. Your cousin leans over and whispers, "They never told us these parts when we were kids." You nod, wide-eyed. You always thought the gods were just warriors and weatherbringers. You didn't realise how tangled they were in desire. But of course they are. If the gods are meant to reflect people, or maybe if people try to reflect the gods, it makes sense that they're messy, emotional, passionate, and sometimes wildly inappropriate. One tale catches your attention in particular. A story of a shield maiden who challenges a jarl to combat after he insults her in front of her clan. She wins, of course, but instead of killing him, she beds him. Not as a reward, but as a power move. The Skald delivers the line with a grin. She claimed his pride, then his body. The second was easier. The crowd erupts. You feel a thrill run through you, like you've just heard someone tell the truth in public for the first time. That's the thing about the sagas. They give you permission to imagine, not just romance, but domination, flirtation, lust without consequences, or at least different ones. In the stories, a woman can be dangerous and desirable in the same breath. She can want without being ruined. She can use sex as a weapon, or a gift, or a joke. Fringe fact? Some of these sagas were considered sacred. Not just entertainment, but spiritual education. Recited at seasonal festivals or during childbirth, or after a death. Because the old gods were with you, not above you, and their stories were your map. A chaotic, horny map with detours into revenge and magical animals, but still a map. And if the gods could behave this way, so could you. You start to notice how the sagas shape the way people think. How your uncle jokes that he needs Freya's blessing before approaching his wife after a fight. How your sister-in-law wears a pendant shaped like a cat. Not just for luck, but as a nod to Freya's chariot drawn by 2 giant felines. Power and sexuality, wrapped together in fur and myth. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about just how accurate these stories are. Were the gods truly revered this way? Or were the more risque parts added later by skalds trying to get laughs from drunk crowds? Some historians argue that Christian scribes, when they finally got around to writing things down, either censored or exaggerated the sexual parts depending on their own agendas. But oral tradition doesn't lie so easily. It evolves, yes, but it remembers. You've seen older women smirk during certain tales, as if they know something everyone else has forgotten. You've seen men puff up with pride when their ancestors are mentioned, not because they were brave in battle, but because they once seduced a witch during a thunderstorm. These are not side plots, they're central. And the messages buried in these myths, they're not subtle. Women who claim their pleasure aren't punished, they're elevated. Men who fail to satisfy their wives are mocked in poetry and flightings. Gods who cross gender lines aren't banished. They become parents to monsters, yes, but also ride them into battle. Identity is flexible. Sexual power is respected, feared, and at times hilariously fumbled. You lie awake that night, listening to the low drone of someone still reciting by the dying fire. Your thoughts drift, not just to the gods, but to yourself, to the way the sagas echo things you felt but never said aloud. That desire can be more than hunger. It can be strategy. That pleasure isn't just something you give. Sometimes it's something you take. That your body doesn't have to be mysterious or shameful. It can be your voice, your spear, your offering. The longhouse settles into a quieter rhythm. Someone stirs beside you. A pair slips away into the dark. No one comments. Maybe they were inspired by the tale of the woman who seduced her way out of exile. Maybe they just couldn't wait. Either way, it fits. Because tonight reminded everyone of something ancient. That sex, love, and power aren't separate. They're braided together, like the strongest ropes, like the gods, like you. And if the gods can walk into desire without apology, then so can you. You're in the weaving hut, your hands aching from hours of pulling wool into thread, when she walks in, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair braided like a warrior's and a jawline you'd swear could split stone. She doesn't say much, just nods and picks up a spindle. her calloused fingers working it faster than you've ever managed. You glance at your friend across the bench, eyebrows raised. She shrugs, but her eyes flick with the same curiosity that's quietly stirring inside you. You've never seen this woman before, and already she's stirring the pot. Her name is Stina. No husband, no children, no explanation. She came from the coast, they say, where she lived with her sister and kept their own house. Whatever that means. You ask your mother, and she says it like it's an ordinary thing, though you've never seen it in your village. 2 women, no men, no father, just choosing to live together, share land, share tasks, maybe more. It's not that you haven't heard whispers before. There's the blacksmith's daughter who always sits too close to the alewife, the herbalist who never married and keeps a carved token of Freya beside her bed. But no one talks about it openly, not because it's forbidden. There's no law in your world against a woman loving another woman, but because it doesn't quite fit into the usual script. Marriage, children, inheritance, alliances, those are the sturdy beams of society. What do you do with love that doesn't build a dynasty? And yet, here she is, Stina, wearing trousers, not a dress, carrying a blade strapped to her thigh. More than once she's challenged the men during sparring practice. Won too, and not with brute force, with clever footwork, precise strikes, and the kind of confidence that makes people uneasy. You see the way others look at her, half admiration, half suspicion. Because when someone walks so boldly outside the lines, you have to ask yourself, why do I stay in them? One day you catch her singing while she dyes cloth, a low song in a dialect you don't know. You ask her where it's from. She says it's from a woman she once loved. A fisherman's daughter, she says simply. She used to sing when she mended nets. There's no embarrassment in her voice, no hesitation, like it's just another part of her story. And you realise something. The way Stina lives, it isn't loud rebellion. It's quiet refusal, a steady, stubborn choice to shape her life around what feels right, not what's expected, and people adapt. They start to leave an extra place for her at feasts. They trade with her like anyone else. Children bring her flowers. No one makes her explain herself, because after a while, she just is. The village bends ever so slightly to make room. You think about your own feelings, the ones you've buried, or brushed aside, or blamed on too much mead and not enough sleep. The way your breath catches when a woman laughs just the right way. The comfort of another girl's hand brushing against yours, accidentally but maybe not. It's always been there, but no one's named it. So you start asking questions, carefully. Your aunt tells you of a time long ago when 2 women ran off to the mountains together. They were cousins, she adds, raising her brows. But they lived a long life. No men, just goats and each other. You don't know if it's true. You don't care. The idea of it wraps around your ribs like a warm ribbon. And the more you listen, the more stories you hear. Not just about women, men too. You overhear one of the younger warriors talking about a boy he kissed during a raid. He says it like a joke, but there's a flicker of something in his voice. And the older man beside him doesn't blink, just nods and says, "It's cold out there." Good to keep warm. Fringe fact. Norse society didn't have the same rigid categories of sexuality that later Christian Europe would impose. There were insults, terms like arga, meant to emasculate a man who was seen as submissive in bed, but they were often more about status and dominance than orientation. Sleeping with another man didn't make you less of a man. Being the lesser in the act, that was the insult. Complicated? Yes. Hypocritical? Often. But not the kind of puritanical condemnation you'd see centuries later. There's even debate among scholars about certain gods and heroes. Loki, for example, the infamous shapeshifter who bore children and bedded across gender lines, isn't treated with scorn for these acts. He's treated with caution, awe, fascination. His chaos is not his queerness, it's just part of his myth. Which leaves you wondering, in a world so steeped in survival, where bodies are tools and pleasure is as sacred as warfare, why wouldn't love be allowed to take different shapes? Who benefits from forcing it into one mould? You sit beside Stina one afternoon shelling peas. Neither of you says much, but she hands you a small knife with a bone handle, carved with 2 intertwined figures. You trace it with your thumb. "Did you make this?" you ask. She nods. "For someone I used to miss?" There's no explanation, just that. And it stays with you for days. You don't make any big declarations, no one's asking you to. But you stop apologising for the way you feel when you catch a girl's eye across the market. You stop pretending it's just admiration when your skin burns under someone's touch. You don't have a name for what you are, but that doesn't mean it's not real. Because in this world, not everything is carved in stone. Some things are drawn in ash, written in songs, carried in charms tucked into tunics. Quiet truths that don't need approval to exist. So you hold on to them, the stories, the glances, the spaces between tradition where your heart has room to beat. And somewhere, under all the noise of goats and gossip and gods, you start to feel something dangerous and beautiful. You begin to feel like yourself. The wind changes first, sharp and sudden, cutting across the village like a blade dipped in salt. Then the bells. Not the usual clanging for lost goats or wandering children, but a rhythmic chime that sends a shiver down your spine. The elders call it the summoning, though no one uses that word aloud anymore. It's old. Older than the longhouse. Older than the gods some people now pretend to worship. You know what's coming. Everyone does. The temple rite. The kind of ritual that makes outsiders whisper and priests twitch in their robes. The kind where no one dares look away. You've never seen one up close. Not really. Only the afterglow. The flickering torches on the hill. The faint scent of herbs and sweat and smoke clinging to the air the next morning. But this year, your name is called. Not shouted. Not announced. Just spoken quietly to your mother, who nods without hesitation and then turns to you with a strange softness in her eyes. "It's time," she says. You don't ask what for. You already know. The sacred grove is deeper into the forest than you expected. The trees close in, ancient and indifferent, their twisted branches clutching the last light of dusk like they're hoarding it for themselves. The path is lined with moss and fireflies, and when you step into the clearing it's like entering another world, one where the air hums with something thick and alive, something watching. There are others here, women mostly, though a few men move among them like shadows. Everyone wears white, simple linen tunics bound with red cord at the waist. You're given one too, and your old clothes disappear into a basket. The tunic clings to you when you breathe. You feel exposed and powerful all at once. At the centre of the clearing stands the vulva, the seeress, draped in furs and beads, her eyes lined with kohl, her voice low and resonant. She begins to chant. It's not a language you know, and yet somehow you understand. She speaks of earth and seed, of womb and sky, of fire that doesn't burn but consumes just the same, and then she calls forth the gods, not with fear, but with invitation. Freya is named first, always first. She of the falcon cloak, the love songs, the fierce hunger. Freya, who weeps golden tears and takes lovers by the handful. No shame in it, no sin, just power. You've heard the tales. Freya who slept with 4 dwarves to gain a necklace so beautiful it made men mad. Freya who leads half the fallen warriors to her hall, because she, not Odin, is first in choice. And here, tonight, her spirit is thick in the air. The rite begins slowly. Women dance barefoot on moss, hips swaying like branches in the wind. You join them, unsure at first, but the rhythm sinks into your bones before your mind can protest. It's not choreographed, it's instinctual. Your body moving not for someone else's pleasure, but for your own release. And when the incense is lit, some blend of crushed pine, mugwort, and something else that makes your skin tingle, you feel yourself slipping, not away, into yourself. Some of the women leave the circle, pairing off into the darker edges of the grove. You know what they're doing. It's part of the rite. Sex here isn't a side effect. It's the offering, the channel, the celebration. This isn't about reproduction. It's not even about romance. It's about honouring the body as divine, touch as sacred, pleasure as a language the gods understand. You don't have to join them. That's the rule. No one forces, no one pressures. But if you do choose, you'll be met with nothing but acceptance. Some stay in the circle, eyes closed, humming as their fingers trace their own skin, connecting to the goddess without ever being touched. Some walk into the dark with a partner whose name they may never know. You choose the fire. You sit by it, legs folded, watching flames lick the sky while others lose themselves in shadow. You don't feel judged. You feel seen, as if the grove itself respects the boundaries you draw. A woman next to you offers her hand, not for passion, just for presence. You take it. Her palm is warm and calloused, You sit like that until the chanting fades and the air stills again. Fringe fact: there are scattered accounts from medieval writers, many of them horrified monks, describing pagan fertility rites in Norse regions involving sex, music, and open devotion to deities like Freya and Njord. The accounts are laced with judgment, of course, but the panic in their words only confirms what the rituals meant to those who practiced them. They were real, they were powerful, and they terrified the people who couldn't understand why women weren't afraid of their own bodies. Scholars still debate whether these rites were widespread or localized, metaphorical or literal. Some argue they were exaggerated by outsiders to demonize pagan practice. Others suggest the reality was even more intense than what was recorded. What's not debated is this: sexuality was not taboo in Norse spirituality. It was interwoven with the divine. The body wasn't a prison to escape. It was the vessel of worship itself. And tonight, you understand that in your marrow. When the ceremony ends, no one rushes to speak. There's no applause, no tidy farewell, just quiet redressing, shared glances, the occasional soft laugh. Some walk away with new secrets, others with none. You return to your village lighter, not because you gave something away, but because you reclaimed something. Something the longhouse never quite made room for. A sense of being your own. Entirely. That night you lie awake under your furs, breathing deeply, still carrying the scent of moss and smoke. You think about how desire doesn't always need an object. How sometimes the sacred thing is the wanting itself. The heat that reminds you you're alive. That your body isn't just a vessel for chores or childbirth, but a conduit for joy, for power, for spirit. And in that space between waking and dreaming, you hear her name again. Freya. Not whispered, not begged, just spoken, bold and whole. And you smile, knowing that the divine isn't just above or beyond you, it's within. She stands in front of the bronze mirror with a look on her face like she's about to go into battle. And in a way she is. Not with swords or axes, but with combs and brooches, the precise tug of a braid, and the unspoken magic of presentation. It's feast night, and every woman in the longhouse knows what that means. Time to look just good enough to catch someone's eye without looking like you tried to catch someone's eye. A delicate balance, as political as it is personal. You're sitting nearby, threading beads into your own hair, polished amber and glass imported from across the sea, and watching your sister fiddle with her neckline. "Too much?" she asks, adjusting the drape to reveal just the right slope of her collarbone. You shake your head. "Just enough," she smirks. "Good. I want him distracted during the toast." Welcome to Viking flirting. Less batting lashes, more strategic armour. You've been learning since you were old enough to carry water that clothing in your world is never just clothing. It's declaration, signal, sometimes seduction. A well-positioned oval brooch can say, "I'm wealthy." A woven belt can say, "My hands are skilled." A red-dyed tunic hem stitched in tight patterns might whisper, "My mother taught me well, and she was terrifying." And if a woman walks into a feast with her cloak pinned off-centre, bearing one shoulder, she's probably not trying to keep warm. Hair, too, carries weight. Girls wear theirs loose or in simple plaits. Married women bind theirs up, secure and tidy. But tonight, you see a dozen subtle rebellions, braids left intentionally messy, ends curled with damp heat, a few thin ribbons slipped into coils like secrets. It's a language, a code. Your friend Sigrid once told you, grinning as she polished her boots, "If I wear my silver comb, I want compliments. If I wear the fox fur, I want company." And sure enough, she's never gone home alone on a fox fur night. Fringe fact: some Viking women owned mirrors, not common, but not unheard of. Bronze or polished stone kept in wooden boxes alongside combs, tweezers, and little pins carved from bone or antler. Grooming wasn't vanity, it was strategy. Just as a warrior sharpened his axe, a woman sharpened her image, especially before a feast, and it worked. Because Viking men noticed. They noticed the subtle shimmer of fish scale embroidery, the way a woman walked when she wore shoes she didn't plan to run in. They noticed the scent of juniper oil behind someone's ear, the kind that lingered in your nose long after the fire burned out. Men prepared too, trimming their beards, donning their best cloaks, even washing. Not always, but it happened. Some would wear armbands meant to draw attention to forearms scarred from battle. Others would let their hair down, literally trying to look more like the Skalds in the stories. Mysterious, poetic, probably bad at farming. You arrive at the feast just before sundown, the sky turning gold over the hilltops, and already the longhouse is buzzing. People toast loudly, hands spilling mead, cheeks flushed. But underneath the celebration, a different energy pulses, a hum of eye contact and lingering touches, of fingers brushing as bowls are passed, of laughter pitched just a little too high to be accidental. This is courtship, Viking style. Public, tangled, negotiated in body language, glances, and sometimes the strategic swapping of jewellery. You see a girl slip her necklace over a boy's head with mock irritation. Everyone laughs. He doesn't give it back. She doesn't ask. Not every flirtation ends in a tryst, but that's not the point. Sometimes it's about being seen, about feeling the heat of someone's attention when the winter's been long and your fingers are cracked from spinning wool. It's about knowing that tonight, for a few hours, you're radiant, desired. You dance eventually. Not the rigid kind of dance with steps and rules, but the loose, swaying sort that happens after the fifth horn of mead. You catch someone's eye across the fire. He grins. You look away. And then, because you can, you look back. There's an open debate among historians about how much attention Viking women paid to appearance. Some argue that all that embroidery and jewellery was just about status. Others insist it was performative, an expression of personality, of power. You think both can be true. Your friend Halla wears a necklace made of animal teeth and knotted twine, not because it's pretty, but because it once scared off a would-be suitor who thought she looked too wild. She liked that. Even within boundaries, there's space to play. You've seen women twist a leather thong around their wrist like a bracelet and then slide it onto someone else's wrist mid-conversation. A promise? A dare? A challenge? No one knows. That's the fun. And don't get it twisted. Flirting in this world can be blunt. There's the woman who walked up to a man last midsummer and said, "I've sharpened my knife and cleaned my bed. Interested?" He said yes. Of course he did. But there's also softness, tenderness, the kind of flirtation that lingers in the air without being spoken, like the older couple who always sit beside each other at feasts still whispering like newlyweds, or the pair who sneak off into the woods every year and return with matching bruises and no explanations. You leave the feast full of food, yes, but also of that strange electric feeling that comes from being wanted, or at least noticed. Your tunic still smells faintly of smoke and clove. Your cheeks ache from smiling. You didn't kiss anyone tonight, didn't slip away into the dark, but you feel good, grounded, like a part of something bigger and more ancient than words. Because dressing up here isn't about competition, it's about ritual, celebration, a form of storytelling written in wool and silver and sweat. A way to say, without ever opening your mouth, "Here I am, look." And tonight they did. There's a gathering near the edge of the longhouse. Not quite a crowd, but enough of a circle to signal something's about to go down. You spot two men standing at the centre, shoulders back, mouths tight, eyes flickering with that mix of pride and wounded ego that always means a verbal fight is brewing. Not fists, not blades. This is something older, more dangerous in its own way. This is a flyting, a traditional Viking insult contest, and tonight it's about sex. You slip into the crowd just in time to hear the first man deliver his opening blow. It's not subtle. Something about the other man's inability to keep a wife satisfied, ending with a metaphor involving limp fish and disappointed goats. The crowd howls. This isn't just teasing, it's poetic assassination. And in Norse culture, your reputation can live or die by what someone says about what you do in bed. Flyting is one part verbal duel, one part ritual humiliation, and one part deeply uncomfortable group entertainment. The rules are loose, creativity is encouraged, rhyme is admired, and wit is everything. But the core of it? Insults, specifically sexual ones. This is how Viking men cut each other down, not with swords, but with words sharp enough to scar. Your grandmother once told you that flyting is where you find out what people really think about each other. Not just whether someone's good at fishing or bad at axe throwing, but whether they're selfish in bed, whether they beg, whether they cry, whether they lie about their conquests. All of it's fair game and none of it's forgotten. Tonight's flyting escalates quickly. The second man responds by calling the first a soft-bellied sheep lover who couldn't satisfy a thrall, let alone a freeborn woman. That gets a gasp. Thrall is a loaded word. To imply that someone can't even dominate someone with no rights, that's rough. But the line lands, and the crowd ripples with laughter and groans. You watch as the first man tries to recover. His eyes narrow. He levels a finger at his opponent and with a dramatic pause says, "The only time your wife moans is when the wind comes through the walls." The circle erupts. The flighting is more than just sport. It's cultural catharsis. Sexual reputation in this world matters. A lot. But not in the way modern people often assume. It's not about chastity or modesty. It's about performance, power, respect. To be good in bed is to be skilled, confident, capable of giving as well as taking. And to be bad in bed? That's social quicksand, especially for men. One of the worst things you can be called in a flighting is arga, unmanly, cowardly, passive. The insult carries weight far beyond the bedroom. It questions your courage, your strength, your very identity. And it often comes with implications about sexual submission. To accuse a man of being used by another man, or worse, enjoying it, is to threaten his place in society. It's more than homophobia. It's about power, about the perceived loss of it. You'd think women would be spared from this kind of verbal warfare, but you'd be wrong. There are tales of female flightings that make even the boldest schools blush. Women who accused each other of seducing married men, of faking orgasms to gain favour, of using magic to turn a lover's seed to dust. Some of these women were praised for their sharp tongues. Others were feared, but none were ignored. Your aunt once told you about a woman named Hild, who was so feared for her flighting skills that men would cross the road to avoid her. She once ended a man's chances of marriage with a single verse, your aunt said, half proud, half terrified. Claimed he finished faster than a dying rooster and wept about it afterward. You still quote that line sometimes when your friends are drinking. Fringe fact? Some flightings were formal parts of legal disputes. If someone accused you of a sexual offence, adultery, coercion, even impotence, you might defend yourself not with witnesses, but with words. The best insult could protect your reputation. The worst could brand you for life. There's even a legend of a woman who defended herself against a charge of being promiscuous by launching a flighting so brutal her accuser left the village entirely. She listed every man who had ever begged for her attention and ended with, "I never gave it to you because even my goats have better rhythm." Not every flighting ends in laughter. Some get too personal, too raw. You've seen friendships sour over a verse spoken too cleverly. But more often, they end with claps on the back and shared drinks. Because surviving a flighting is, in its own way, a badge of honour. It means you can take the heat, that you have enough dignity to laugh when the spotlight turns on you. Tonight's flighting winds down with a final flourish. The second man ends on a high note, claiming the first wife left him not for another man, but for better cooking. It's ridiculous. It's perfect, and it leaves the crowd howling with delight. Even the first man cracks a smile, tightly, but still. No one wins a flighting by staying angry. You walk home from the feast thinking about how much these battles reveal. Not just about the people in them, but about the culture that encourages them. Here, sex isn't just something you do in the dark. It's something that can be sung about, boasted over, weaponized and defended. A source of pride or ridicule, depending on how well you carry it. It's strange, you think, how this brutal, smoky, goat-filled world treats sex like both a sacred rite and a punchline. But maybe that's what makes it real, honest, alive. You glance at your friend beside you and smirk. "If I ever get into a flighting, promise me you'll lie and say I was amazing," she laughs. No need to lie. And just like that, your reputation lives to see another day. You hear them long before you see them, young voices echoing across the hill, rising and falling in that sing-song rhythm you remember from your own childhood. A rhyme about a farmer's daughter, a goat, and a suspiciously well-endowed troll. The song is wildly inappropriate, hilarious, and older than anyone can trace. And of course, all the kids know it by heart. Because in your village, sexual knowledge doesn't come from lectures. It comes from songs, riddles, stories whispered behind storage sheds, and games that start off innocent and end with someone's face redder than the fire pit. Sex education here isn't a formal thing. No midwife stands at the front of a longhouse holding up diagrams. There's no set age where a girl is sat down and told how babies are made. It's more like osmosis. The way snow melts into spring, you just absorb it. From the world, from the whispers, from what your older cousins don't say but heavily imply, from the knowing glances exchanged between grown women after a feast night when someone's limping a little the next morning. You think back to when you were a child, crouched in the shadows near the back of the goat shed with your best friend, eavesdropping on the older teens. The things they said didn't fully make sense at the time, but your brain clung to the phrases anyway. He was like a deer in rut. She moaned like the sea. He didn't even thank her. At the time, you weren't even sure what the thanking was for, but you knew it meant something. Later you started asking real questions. Your mother answered the practical ones with surprising frankness. Yes, that's how a baby is made. No, it doesn't always feel good the first time. Yes, some men are bad at it, but they often think they're excellent. But she left the emotional pieces for you to figure out on your own. Love, desire, boundaries. That part was your journey. And honestly, the world didn't wait for you to catch up. By the time you hit 13, your body became a topic of conversation. Not to you, around you. Hushed speculation about who might be interested, who might offer a betrothal, whether you looked like your mother did at that age. And suddenly everything felt like performance. How you sat, how you laughed, whether or not your tunic hugged the wrong places. That's when you started paying attention to what the other women said. Not to you, again, but to each other. The warnings, the wisdom. Like when one of the washerwomen muttered, "Don't lie still like a fish. If you're not having fun, make him fix it." Or when your cousin rolled her eyes and said, "If he only talks about himself during chores, imagine what he's like in bed." There's no official curriculum for any of this. No scroll labelled things you should know about sex. But the culture does its job. Loudly, crudely, and often with a sense of humour that veers between the obscene and the oddly touching. Fringe fact. Some Viking riddles from preserved manuscripts are so suggestive they read like ancient stand-up comedy. One poem compares a plough going into a furrow to a man taking a woman. Another asks the listener to guess what hangs by the thigh, stiff and full of seed. Spoiler, it's an onion sack, but you already know what everyone thinks it is. These weren't just naughty jokes, they were memory tools. Riddles helped embed social lessons into everyday life. Laugh and learn. That was the rule. There's an open scholarly debate about how open Viking culture really was about sex with children and teens. Some believe the society was freer than most, with fewer taboos around nudity, sexual topics, and even experimentation. Others argue that while sex was discussed openly, it didn't necessarily mean young people were encouraged to act on it too early. The truth, as always, likely lived somewhere in the middle. People talked, joked, taught, and watched carefully. You didn't go from child to adult overnight, but the transition came quicker than it does now. You remember the first time you saw two people kissing. Not a polite peck or a ceremonial smush at a wedding, but really kissing. Deep. Intentional. You didn't understand the mechanics, but your whole chest buzzed like it had been struck. Your friend laughed and called you dramatic, but later, when you were alone, she admitted she felt the same. It's like they were eating each other's faces, she said, then paused. But also like, they meant it. And then there were the mistakes. The girl who fell pregnant too young. The boy who bragged about sleeping with a married woman and found himself shoveling manure for the rest of the summer. These stories became cautionary tales, not wrapped in shame, necessarily, but used to teach, to warn. Everyone has a cousin who did something reckless and paid for it in blisters and awkward family meals. The conversations continue as you grow older. One day, you'll be the one whispering over chores, handing off bitter herbs or soft encouragements, reminding some blushing girl that it's okay to want things, and okay to not want them too. That her pleasure matters. That no one should ever treat her body like borrowed equipment. That if it hurts, and you don't want it to, you're allowed to say, stop. You think about all this as you watch the younger kids race past the longhouse, still singing their ridiculous rhyme about the troll and the farmer's daughter. You laugh, even though it's wildly inappropriate. Because in a strange way, you're proud. Not of the lyrics, but of the freedom baked into it. The way even the children in your village know that sex isn't something to be hidden behind locked doors and red-faced silences. It's something to be understood, discussed, laughed at, respected. There's no shame here in being curious, no sin in wanting to know. The only danger lies in not knowing, and pretending otherwise. So you pass the knowledge on bit by bit, in eye rolls, in riddles, in the soft grip of a hand on a shoulder when someone asks, awkward and unsure, "How do you know when it's good?" You just smile. You'll know, or you'll learn. Either way, you're not alone. and that's what matters. There's a low buzz running through the village like a hornet just stirred from sleep. You feel it even before anyone says a word. Tension humming behind every polite smile, every nod that lingers a little too long. Something has happened. You find out the moment you step into the longhouse and see her. Kara. She's sitting near the central hearth, chin lifted, shoulders back, calm as ice on a still fjord. But her face, stone-set and unreadable, tells you all you need to know. Word is spreading fast. Her husband accused her of adultery, loudly, in front of the elders, said she lay with another man while he was off trading dried fish 2 valleys over, and now the whole community is waiting to see how it'll play out. Accusations like this are serious, not because anyone's shocked that people sneak off into the woods for a bit of fun, it happens, but because adultery, officially, cuts across the threads of family, inheritance, alliance. It's not about feelings, it's about order, especially when land, livestock or bloodlines are on the table. But here's the thing, it's not just his honour on trial, because in Viking society, if a man accuses his wife of adultery and she denies it, he'd better be absolutely certain. If he can't prove it, and she chooses to fight back, he can be fined or publicly shamed for slander. The law cuts both ways, which means it's not just about vengeance, it's about evidence, witnesses, patterns, proof. And Kara, she's not backing down. She says she didn't sleep with anyone, that he made it up to avoid paying her the silver he promised in their marriage agreement, that he's angry she speaks her mind in the longhouse. And suddenly, this isn't just about who kissed whom in the shadows, this is about power. You've seen this before, how sex accusations become a tool, not just of jealousy, but of control. A way to discredit a woman, to corner her into silence, and it doesn't only happen from husbands. Sometimes it's rivals, elders, even strangers who feel threatened by a woman with too much presence. Whisper the right rumour, and suddenly she's branded a seductress, a harlot, a snake in the furs. But tonight, Kara doesn't slink away. She demands a hearing. You gather in the assembly circle with half the village, every eye flicking between her and her husband. He looks nervous now. Probably didn't think she'd push back. She stands tall, arms crossed, and says clearly, if he has proof, let him bring it. If not, let him pay. Her voice doesn't shake once. Fringe fact. Under Norse law, women had legal protections when it came to accusations of adultery. In some regions, if a woman could swear an oath before witnesses, declaring her innocence on pain of divine wrath, it was taken seriously. These weren't empty rituals. Breaking an oath wasn't just a lie. It risked the wrath of the gods, and that meant something. There's a scholars' debate that still churns today about how equal Viking women really were. Some point to the sagas, full of fierce, outspoken women who choose lovers, divorce husbands, even kill rivals. Others argue that these are just idealised versions, rare exceptions, not the rule. But here, watching Kara stand her ground, you don't see an exception. You see precedent. A woman using the tools of the system, language, law and confidence to hold her line, and the people listen. She names the silver owed to her, recites the terms of their union, names 2 neighbours who can swear she was seen working the fields during the week he claimed she was unfaithful. One of them even says dryly, she was covered in goat crap. Not exactly romantic conditions. The crowd laughs. The tension breaks, just a little. When her husband tries to interrupt, the elder leading the hearing shuts him down. You made the claim, she's answered, now bring your witnesses. He doesn't have any. By the end of the hour, it's clear to everyone, this wasn't about betrayal. It was about pride. A man trying to shake off obligation by throwing his wife under a passing cart. And it backfired. The verdict is swift. He's ordered to pay the silver he owes her. She's offered the right to divorce if she wants it. She takes it, doesn't even flinch. Just nods once, turns her back, and walks away. Free. That night she burns his old tunic behind the longhouse. You watch her, and she glances over. A flicker of something in her eyes. Not triumph exactly, but certainty. She knew what she was worth. And now, everyone else does too. You think about the weight of that. For Viking women, honour wasn't just tied to chastity, it was tied to truth, to the ability to defend yourself, to stand up and say, no, I don't accept your version of the story. And if you could do it well enough, you weren't just protected, you were respected. Sure, gossip doesn't disappear. People still whisper. You catch someone muttering about how Kara must have done something to make her husband snap like that. But mostly they admire her. She'll remarry if she wants to. Or she won't. Either way, she's not a pariah. She's just Kara. The woman who didn't flinch. And that, in a society like this, means more than being well-behaved ever could. You head to bed with her story echoing in your bones, not because it was scandalous, but because it reminded everyone, especially the younger girls watching from the corners, that sex isn't just about desire, it's about power, reputation, autonomy. And if someone tries to take yours from you, you have every right to raise your voice and demand the world listen. And sometimes, the world actually does. The sky's moody this morning, heavy with a thick mist that turns every familiar shape into something mythic. The smoke curling from chimney holes seems to vanish into the low-hanging fog, and for once the goats are quiet, too damp to cause trouble. It's the kind of day that makes people speak in hushed tones, like the gods might be napping nearby and should probably not be disturbed. You step outside with your cloak wrapped tight, and see something strange. Two men standing awkwardly near the old stone marker at the edge of the village, one of them holding a carved wooden box, the other nervously clutching a drinking horn. There's a wedding today, a quiet one, but not a usual one. Word has it the couple are both men, Torleif, a trader from the river road, and Halvard, the youngest son of the beekeeper. You know both of them, though not well. You know Halvard's gentle hands and the way he can calm a furious horse with a single hum. You know Torleif's sarcastic mouth and his habit of overpaying for honey, because he claims he has no talent for barter. And now, apparently, they have each other. You're not shocked exactly, just curious. Curious how this works here, in a world where lineage is important, where property often passes through bloodlines, where marriage is usually about alliances as much as love. This kind of union doesn't quite fit, and yet no one stopped it. No one has forbidden them from standing there in the mist, hands close but not touching, waiting for the Gothi, the priest of the old gods, to arrive.
When he does, he doesn't bat an eye. Just steps between them, murmurs a greeting, and opens the wooden box to retrieve a small stone hammer, Thor's symbol, carved from dark granite. He sets it down between the men and begins the ceremony. It's short. No cattle are traded, no mead is poured over swords. Just an oath spoken softly between the two, a shared promise of loyalty and partnership. No mention of children, no mention of duties, just the bond, the choice. And it is a choice. That's what makes it real. Fringe fact, though not widely documented, there's reason to believe that same-sex relationships in Viking society were not always condemned, at least not in the way later Christian systems would enforce. Certain sagas and poems hint at deep emotional and physical bonds between same-sex partners, and the insult arger, often used to attack men accused of passivity in sex, implies that what was truly at stake wasn't who loved whom, but who held power. This complicates everything, because it means that love between two men, or two women, wasn't automatically reviled. It depended on context, status, consent, the terms of the relationship. If you held your dignity, if you stood by your oath, if you didn't betray your clan or household, there was room. And apparently, in your village, that room still exists. The ceremony ends with the Gothi placing a hand on each of their shoulders and nodding. "What you are is bound now," he says. "Let it be strong." A few people clap. No feasting, no wild celebration, but no stones thrown either, no curses muttered. Just quiet acknowledgement, like someone has finally put a proper roof on a house that was always standing. Later, in the longhouse, you hear someone grumble. "What's the point of a marriage if no children come from it?" Your cousin answers without looking up from her stitching. "Plenty of marriages with children and no love. Let them have their love." And that's that. You remember how, growing up, you were told stories of gods and warriors and queens, but the tales never quite made space for anything outside the usual pairings. Man and woman, jarl and maiden, bride and groom. But if you look deeper, you find the cracks. The sagas don't always say it plain, but they hint. At friendships too intense to be platonic. At women who never married, but were buried with runes praising their beloved. At sea, captains who chose to live with one man for decades, far from home. It's in the margins, but it's there. There's ongoing debate among historians whether Viking society formally recognized same-sex unions or simply tolerated them in certain contexts. Most of what we have are fragments, ambiguous language, suspiciously poetic descriptions of close comradeship, or burial sites that suggest shared domestic life between people of the same sex. But absence of condemnation isn't the same as absence of experience. People were still loving each other, choosing each other. And sometimes, if they were lucky, they weren't punished for it. You see Halvard and Torleif later that evening, sitting close by the hearth. No hands held, no kisses stolen. Just quiet smiles, the kind that only happen when something long expected has finally arrived. They don't ask to be noticed. But you notice anyway. Your friend leans over and says, "It's strange, isn't it?" You glance at her. "What is?" She shrugs. How love fits itself into spaces you didn't think were big enough. You nod, because she's right. The world you live in is harsh, built on stone and frost, fed by sweat and fire. There's not a lot of room for softness, but somehow love still shows up, in stolen glances, in shared blankets, in quiet, stubborn weddings on misty mornings when everyone's pretending not to stare. And maybe that's enough. Not every marriage needs witnesses shouting joy. Sometimes all it needs is a few people who don't look away, a few who understand that the bonds we make, whether written in ink, blood, or breath, are sacred because we say they are. You fall asleep that night with the image of two men standing in fog, hands nearly touching. You think about what it means to be brave in a world that doesn't always understand you, and how courage sometimes looks like showing up, just being. And you hope that if your heart ever asks for something outside the expected, there will be someone there to say, "Let it be strong." By the time the spring thaw comes, the whole village is a little delirious. After months of ice-crusted mornings, muddy boots, and sharing body heat with goats that don't appreciate it, the first warm wind feels like a divine kiss. And with it comes something else, something wilder, looser, and entirely less subtle. People get frisky. It starts innocently enough. The sun stays up longer. The furs come off. People start bathing more than once a week. The river smells like something other than despair. But then the glances start. The lingering. The casual touching. It's not just the goats rutting, everyone is. You're down by the stream scrubbing winter from your clothes when you hear the first strains of music. Not the usual work songs, but something lighter, flirty almost. You follow the sound and find a handful of younger villagers gathered in a clearing, laughing as someone plays the lyre and another recites poetry that's barely pretending not to be erotic. One line ends with something about plowing soft furrows, and a girl drops her bucket from laughing so hard. This apparently is spring courtship season. No one announces it. There's no official name, but everyone knows it's happening. It's that brief window after the last frost, and before the planting season where the land breathes again, and so do you. All those feelings that sat bundled up under layers of wool and frostbite finally crawl out, blinking in the sunlight, hungry. Couples start to form, sometimes fast, sometimes slow. It's not always serious. In fact, most of the time, it's not. There's an unspoken rule here. Not all affection has to lead to marriage, and not all desire needs a future attached to it. If the world might end from war, illness, or a particularly unlucky cow trampling, you might as well enjoy yourself while you can. You watch one pair flirt in a way that can only be described as tactical warfare. She pretends not to hear him. He, accidentally, walks by every time she draws water. Eventually, she hands him a bundle of herbs, subtle language for, "Meet me behind the elder tree tonight." He doesn't even pretend to be cool about it. Just bolts. Fringe fact, there are old poems, some preserved in Icelandic sagas, that include love charms used during this time of year. Not always magical, per se, but poetic. Runes carved into bark, messages woven into cloth, tokens left under a pillow. The Viking version of leaving your crush a cryptic message and hoping they get it before someone else does. Spring also brings blots, sacrificial feasts held in honor of the gods, especially Freyr and Freya. These ceremonies are meant to bless the fields, the animals, and, not subtly, fertility in general. You've seen what happens after one of these feasts. The food disappears, the music swells, and by the time the fire burns low, half the village is either coupled up or pretending not to be jealous of those who are. And unlike some later societies that saw sexuality as sinful or something to control, your people treat it like weather. Natural, inevitable, sometimes inconvenient, but never shameful. If someone disappears into the woods with someone else, no one asks why. If they return rumpled and smiling, no one asks questions, unless they want the details. That said, there are rules. Consent, for one. That's not just a modern idea. It's baked into how your society understands bonds. Forced sex isn't just a private crime here. It's a public disgrace. A man who takes without asking can face serious penalties. Fines, exile, or worse, depending on the clan and the context. And a woman's testimony matters. It's not always perfect justice, but it's more justice than many think your world capable of. There's also a difference between a flirtation and a promise. If someone gives you a token, say a ring or a knife or a pendant carved from whalebone, that usually means something more serious, a binding of sorts. People notice. And if you break that bond without cause, that follows you. So you move carefully. You dance when the music starts. You laugh when the poems get dirty. And you let your hand brush the one you've been eyeing for weeks. Just a brush. For now. There's an open scholarly debate about whether Viking courtship was as casual as it appears. Some historians argue that marriage negotiations and family alliances made romantic choice rare. But others point out how many sagas include love matches, secret rendezvous, and couples who married because they loved each other, not in spite of it. You think the truth is probably both. Formal unions served politics, but outside of that, people found each other. And sometimes they found each other just for one season, a spring lover, a brief blaze, a memory that smells like wet grass and mead. Your own first kiss happened during this time, 2 springs ago, under a blooming elder tree so thick with white blossoms it looked like snow. He was clumsy. You were nervous. It was more forehead than lips. But afterward, he grinned like he'd survived a raid and you couldn't stop laughing. You never married him. He left with a trade caravan, but you still think of that kiss whenever the elder blooms. Tonight, the village is buzzing again. Another bonfire, more singing. You slip on your lightest tunic, the one that moves when you walk and smells faintly of last summer's smoke. Someone offers you a drink. Someone else offers you a place to sit. You don't say yes to either. Not yet. You're not in a rush. Because the beauty of spring courtship here isn't in the urgency. It's in the play, the possibility, the chance to remember that even in a world of chores and chill and long winters, there's always this. Warm hands, flushed faces, and the soft, reckless chance of something lovely, even if only for a night. And sometimes, that's enough. There's a new face at the fire tonight. She doesn't say much at first, just nods politely, takes the horn of mead offered to her, and listens. Her tunic's southern, finer weave, stitched tight around the sleeves, dyed a soft brown with trim you don't recognize. You can tell by her hands she's not from around here. Fewer calluses, slender fingers that look more accustomed to parchment than pitchforks. Someone says she came from the coast, traveled upriver with her uncle who's trading salt and dried cod. But the whispers say something else. They say she studied, in a monastery, or near one. Maybe with monks, maybe with traders, maybe under some traveling scribe who taught her to read in 3 languages. The truth, as usual, is murky. But what's clear is that she sees the world differently. Her name is Astrid, and she is dangerously curious. The first thing she asks you, without ceremony, is whether Viking women really have as much freedom as the songs claim. You blink at her, caught off guard, and say something vague about land rights and divorce. But she pushes deeper. And sexually, she asks, are you allowed to choose? You pause, then smile. Yes, more than people think. It sparks something in her. That night, long after the others have drifted off to sleep or stolen away for firelit fumbling behind the barn, You and Astrid sit cross-legged by the dying embers and talk. About women, about men, about the strange, complicated rules that hover around desire, and about how those rules shift depending on who's telling the story. She tells you that where she's from, women are not taught to want. They're taught to endure. That desire, when it's mentioned at all, is a flaw to be confessed, not a gift to be explored. That even love is supposed to be quiet, sacrificial. That sex is often the price you pay for protection. And suddenly, you understand why she looks at your world with both awe and confusion. Because here, while not perfect by any stretch, desire is not always dirty. Women are not always expected to swallow their pleasure like spoiled milk. Here, you've watched women laugh about sex, tease about it, even argue over it. You've seen women walk away from lovers without shame. You've seen men beg for affection and be teased for trying too hard. It's not a paradise, but it breathes. Fringe fact: in certain Viking communities, especially those farther from Christian influence, women had documented rights that astonished even later scholars. They could inherit land, initiate divorce, own property, and in some rare cases, even lead expeditions. This extended, at least informally, to relationships as well. If a woman chose a partner, her word held weight. If she ended a union, she wasn't automatically branded a pariah. And in some sagas, women took lovers before or after marriage, without being destroyed by it. Astrid listens, rapt as you share stories. Some yours, some borrowed. Some from old women who keep truth hidden in jokes. You tell her about the girl who lived with her healer aunt and had a new lover every season, each of them arriving with fresh offerings, a honeycomb, a silver button, a rare mushroom. You tell her about the shield maiden who made a pact with her war brother to never marry, only love as they pleased. And you tell her the tale of the woman who ran off with a married man, not for love, but for the thrill of the forbidden, and lived to joke about it in her 40s. Astrid is wide-eyed. And people just accept this? You shrug. Not always, but no one stoned them. She laughs, a strange laugh, part joy, part disbelief. And then she says something that makes your heart twist. Where I'm from, I've never even said the word want out loud. You don't know what to say to that, so you don't say anything. You just reach for her hand, warm and steady in the flickering light, and hold it. Not romantically, just human to human. Like a bridge. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much Viking women really owned their desire, or whether these tales are overblown. Some historians argue that the sagas were exaggerated, that women weren't nearly as free as we think, and that the stories of fierce, sexually liberated shield maidens were just wishful thinking by bards and rebels. Others say the sagas reflect reality more than we admit, that they captured a culture in transition, one where women carved out power even in a male-dominated world. You suspect it's both, exaggerated and true, dreamed and remembered. As spring deepens, Astrid begins to settle in. She helps with weaving, tries her hand at goat herding. She's terrible at it. But she's quick with a joke and quicker with a story, and slowly she starts to open. You see her laughing at the market, her posture looser. She even flirts, awkwardly, charmingly, with a girl who sells root vegetables and has arms like braided rope. And the world doesn't end. You find her one morning down by the river, writing something with a charred stick on flat stone. She doesn't hide it. When you ask, she says, "I'm writing about all this, so I don't forget. So someone else might learn it too." You nod, moved. "Good. Write it messy. Write it true." She smiles. "I want to write it the way it feels, not just what happened." And that, you realize, is what people like Astrid are for. Not just to learn, but to carry. To take what your village holds in muscle and memory and give it legs. Let it walk farther. Let it survive. That night, she brings you a scrap of cloth with a stitched line that reads, "Desire is not disobedience." You run your thumb across it. "Put that on a shield," you joke. "I plan to," she says, dead serious. And you believe her. Because even in a world that carves most truth into stone and song, sometimes it takes someone from the outside, bold, trembling, and burning with questions, to remind you how precious that truth really is. The summer solstice arrives with fire in its throat and sweat on its breath. The sun barely dips below the horizon, only to rise again before your dreams can even finish. The entire world feels stretched thin with heat and possibility. It's a time when people do strange things, say yes when they usually say maybe, make oaths they'll later laugh about, run naked into lakes just because the water looks like melted sky. And tonight, as flames leap high into the air and drums pulse like distant thunder, you realize this is it, the end of the story, or at least the part you'll carry forward. You stand near the bonfire, the heat licking your ankles, watching your people swirl and shout and throw their arms around each other with abandon. No speeches, no ceremonies, just bodies, dancing, kissing, howling at the twilight like wolves who forgot what shame feels like. It's beautiful and it's chaos, and you can't stop smiling. Somewhere in the mess, Kara is dancing barefoot with a stranger who can't seem to stop grinning. Astrid is tucked beneath the roots of an ash tree, kissing the vegetable seller like she's starving and found the last sweet thing on earth. Even old Stina is here, arms crossed, sipping from a horn and pretending not to enjoy the attention of a younger woman who's clearly trying to impress her by juggling fire sticks. This, you think, is the real heart of Viking love, not the sagas or the marriage contracts or the wild boasts of men who can't even braid their own hair. It's this. The way people find each other in the dark, the way choice weaves through everything like golden thread, the way desire is not just permitted but honored, not just sacred but funny too. You've learned that sex in this world is neither shameful nor simple. It's a negotiation, a performance, a dance, a contract, a joke, a prayer. Sometimes all at once. It can be violent, healing, selfish, generous. It can build families or wreck them. It can make people brave or stupid. And in the end, it's never just about bodies. It's about power. Who holds it? Who gives it? Who claims it? Fringe fact, midsummer celebrations in the Norse world were often tied to fertility and abundance. Bonfires were lit to honor the sun, drive away spirits, and bless the land. And though modern records are patchy, some oral traditions suggest these nights were known for their loosened rules, temporary pairings, flirtation, even public intimacy under the watch of the gods. A ritual of release before the harvest toil returned. Tonight feels like that, release. There's still debate among scholars about how much of Norse sexuality was public ritual versus private reality. Were those sacred rites we whisper about actually practiced often, or were they more symbolic? Did everyone really accept same-sex love, or only when it didn't threaten inheritance lines? Was female pleasure always valued, or just celebrated in poetry? But here, now, in the dancing light of a fire that refuses to die, the answers don't matter. What matters is the moment, the eye contact, the sweat-slicked laugh, the knowledge that your body is yours, and your choices ripple outward like stones in a still lake. You feel a hand brush yours. It's someone you know, not someone you expected. There's no word exchanged, just a look, a question, and more importantly, the space to say yes or no. You say yes. Not because you have to, not because you're proving anything, but because it feels good, because the world is buzzing and you're alive in it. You slip away from the fire, into the tall grass, under the soft light of a sun that won't quite set. No shame, no rush, just two people exploring the shape of each other's yes. Every touch a sentence, every gasp a poem, every laugh a prayer. And when you return, later, cheeks flushed and hair a mess, no one stares. No one judges. Someone hands you a drink. Someone else nods knowingly. You sit in the dirt, legs tangled, and watch the fire crackle on. This, you realize, is how memory is made, not in grand declarations, but in small moments strung together like beads on a thread. A look, a choice, a night, a truth. And that truth is this. Viking women did not live in cages. They lived in bodies that worked, that loved, that wanted. They navigated sex like they navigated everything else, with strength, humor, defiance, and an unshakable sense that their pleasure mattered. And when people tried to take that from them, through force, through shame, through silence, they fought back. Sometimes with laws, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with a blade. You fall asleep that night beneath the stars, or what little you can see of them, still hearing the drums, still feeling that delicious ache in your limbs. And for once, you dream not of cold or chores or duties, but of softness, of laughter, of hands held in firelight, of your body as a temple, not a battleground. When the sun rises, and let's be honest, it never really left, you wake up with the warmth of the night still curled around you. And you know deeply that whatever happens next, you are changed. Not just by what you learned about sex or love or power, but by knowing that it's all tangled together, and that you are allowed to take up space in that tangle. You are allowed to want, to refuse, to reach, to leave, to laugh. You are allowed to write your own saga,